BOYO redacted alert. That was a terrible Irish accent. I should have just done the Canadian thing. You know, I do have some Irish blood in me, so.
But it came out there, sir. It came out there just briefly. I could see it glimmering. I could see it screaming, being like, "Release me!"
I'll work on it. See, you know what the problem is? I'm a conjunction of opposites. I'm half Irish and half English, so I'm like the
oh
God
my
image.
Jesus! Yeah, right, dude. This is a good idea, but I gotta go. I'm sorry. That's just not right. That's just not right.
Come on, that's what you're supposed to strive to. You know, I'm the higher ideal.
Wait! Oh my God! Wait, there's one way that you could redeem this. Who's the Irish? Is it mum or dad, and who's the English?
Oh, my dad is Irish. My mum is English.
Maybe I consider that okay then.
Wow. Okay. Hopefully, we don't have any feminists watching this stream.
Oh yeah, it's true. Apologies. That's just the inferiority complex of the Irishman coming out. Apologies, everyone. I hope we don't slander Matt for this or anything like that.
Anyways.
Matt. Or Max, sorry, Max. Thanks for having me on, sir.
No, thank you for coming, dude. To the people that don't know who this gentleman is, this is Uberboyo. If you've been watching his real name is Steafan, so say hi.
Hey, gents. BOYO alert.
BOYO effing alert. It's if you have been watching my Aion series, you'll remember that at the end of each of the videos, I'll say, go subscribe to Uberboyo. And the reason why I say that is because on his channel, he does a lot of the Jungian stuff. The main reason why, even though he does a great job with it, is that whereas I do sort of the simple version, trying to break down the various chapters of Carl Jung's work, Aion, what Steafan does with his videos is he does a much longer form discussion of these topics. And a lot of the times he goes into stuff that helps broaden your appreciation for the material. So I sort of encourage people to go in the order of watching my videos and then going to watch his videos. And so far, I've actually gotten a whole bunch of people telling me that they've been doing it, and it's added to their overall appreciation. And so we also, just offline, he and I have been saying, hey, we should do a stream when you actually finish the series. And thank God I finally finished it. And now we are here. We got a lot of stuff to talk about, man.
Yes, most certainly. Like it's good because the way myself and Jimmy's over on Young to Live By. If anybody's so check him out as well. He's on another channel too. And myself and Jimmy ripped into this. It's funny because we were just starting out, I guess, on YouTube, and both of us are like, I think Jimmy wrote up on Twitter, it's like, have you ever seen Aion before or read Aion before? And I was like, yes. And he's like, I've never met anybody else who's ever read Aion. And so the two of us sort of like said, all right, let's read Aion together.
Yeah,
and then
that's the thing. It's like I've been looking forward to this because this material is so difficult to get into, and to find anybody they could talk to about it, it's non-existent. So thankfully I'm here so that I can actually get off some of the things that have been worrying me off my chest. This is going to be very therapeutic for me, like all the prophetic stuff that's in the book. It's going to be like, Steafan, help me, man. I'm having an existential crisis here,
Yeah, man. Like, I think, like, once I kind of got through it, I read the book once before me and Jimmy ever started talking. I'd read the book and I read it quite like close, and I found it very difficult to get through. And I found some of the novel ideas, like, the astrology and all that. And I was like, well, that is really wacky. Like, there's some really interesting stuff in here. I knew a lot of the basic Jungian stuff from just years of doing it. And that was a lot of stuff at the start. And I didn't quite have such an appreciation for it. Then when me and Jimmy went through it, like, I kind of got it a level deeper. It kind of clicked. Yeah. And the one I would love to talk about at some point in this one is the alchemy and a relationship to AI. That's really what clicked with me. Oh. And that absolutely blew my mind. But then, in the light of a lot of the recent stuff, I'm like, oh my God, it's even more crazy than I thought,
Yeah,
Sorry. Yeah. Well, this is maybe what we can dive into here today. I'll go on a riff in a moment and chat about a lot of this stuff. But you just keep on digging down into layers, and you keep turning back to this theory by Jung, and it's interesting. Like, perhaps what he says on Aion might not be comprehensively true or foundational theory, but I think the more you start to understand why he came to this conclusion, the more it starts to blow your mind. And that is certainly what I'm going to get into by talking about the Red Book a little bit.
Yeah, that's exactly what Peterson said in the lecture that sort of turned me on to Aion in the first place. He gave a lecture on Jung back in 2014, and that's when he actually first mentioned Aion on YouTube. And he
Yeah.
said, you got to bang your head against those books quite a bit. And literally and metaphorically, that's, well, not literally. You don't want to bang the thing against your head, even though sometimes you might be inclined to. It's like astrology. What? But it's, you actually have to do that before you get a deeper appreciation of it. And thankfully, your streams help me do that. So yeah, we are going to get into, I'm curious to see what you're going to do in regards to the connection between alchemy and AI. The Red Book, I got a couple questions to ask you about certain planets aligning later this year. But first of all, you suggested, just to sort of lay the groundwork of this discussion, we should just sort of, for some people who might not be inclined to watch my entire series or go and watch your books your videos, and are just listening to this video, let's just start with essentially what Jung's main theory is in regards to Aion, how it came about, and and then we'll get into some of those discoveries, like you just said. So, do I sort of want to lay that out, like you messaged me about how Descartes' conception of the ego might be wrong?
Yes. Well, yes. So this is actually going to maybe deviate a little bit. I'm going to go, as I'm known to do, I'm going to go the long way around coming to the conclusion. So, of course, Jung is a psychologist, okay? This is what he is known as. And psychology is actually a very, very new field still, even though we don't treat it that way. It's like only 120 years or so old. Like it's unbelievably fresh. And what is so interesting about psychology is that the study of the mind. Now, this is a really, really novel thing that people, I don't think, get. And this is actually a problem with Jungians, I find, is that they turn Jung into this sort of cult of some sort. You see this a lot. But they miss what I think Jung was trying to do, and he's sort of trying to say that it's actually quite a long philosophical problem that the West was trying to solve, which is that there's a world out there, and then there's my head, and my head is not exactly reliable at telling me what's going on in the world, but obviously there's an objective world out there that you want to pay attention to. So the goal is to kind of get in touch with reality and then deal with reality. You don't want to be delusional, but we're very prone to delusion. And so psychology is this study of your head to try to figure out, right, how do I use my head properly, basically, so I can see things as they are. As Nietzsche said, the foundation towards great thinking and great writing and all that is observation, being able to see properly. And of course, the same thesis you start to approach in Jung begins to appear, is the ability to see through, shall we call it, your complexes or your delusions or your biases or all this type of stuff. And it's a common thesis that runs underneath all of psychology. Now, what's really interesting about that is that it's this idea of how our heads work becomes this really important idea, and we've inherited from the Enlightenment. This is all like quite deep history from about 500 years ago, and around about 500, 200, between 200 and 500 years ago, we've inherited this idea of what our minds do. And one of the main ideas is that our minds are supposed to be rational, but superstition gets in the way. This would be the Cartesian concept, or the Enlightenment concept of the mind, if you will. Basically, we are naturally very rational. We have these rational egos. And when we look out into the world, we see facts. And the reason why we make mistakes is because we ignore those facts, because we're superstitious or ignorant or backwards or something like that. And this is a very, very simplistic way of understanding the mind. And obviously, like when we dig into this theory, we're like, that's not true. But if you actually look at the way people operate in our dearest democracy, like this is what we treat people like. We sort of say, here's the facts, and you're ignoring them because you're ignorant and bigoted. And it doesn't matter which side you're on. That's literally how it's perceived. And I genuinely mean that. I just see that all the time. This is how it's emotionally framed to people. It's like you're ignoring the facts. Now, of course, people like Freud and Jung would come in, and Nietzsche especially. I don't think people give Nietzsche enough credit for being a brilliant psychologist, and would change the fundamental premise and say, no. Like what your mind is your sort of emotions and your instincts and all that. It's a different thing. It's not, if you clear out all the crap, you won't find this rational, disembodied, floating being there. Not at all. No, what you'll find is almost like an animal, basically. And this animal is prone to bias and lying and delusion. And this is what is going to influence things. So when you show someone facts, you show someone reality, you show someone documents and information that proves them wrong, they're going to choose not to see that because it suits their instincts to ignore that. This is what we call cognitive dissonance. So basically, we're starting to find evidence to support this thesis. Now, basically what people like Jung and Freud began, and they didn't finish it, was this problem, right? How do we figure out what's going on with our heads so that we can understand the problem that's getting in the way, which is our psychology? Basically the idea of how do we clear up the vision? How do we get this stuff out of the way and see the world as it is? And so cognitive dissonance is one thing they found. Now, a thing that I've been riffing on quite a lot recently is the left brain and the right brain. And this is incredibly important, I find, or useful for going towards a lot of the theses I'm going to bring up in a moment. Basically, your brain is divided into two big lumps. You've got a left brain consciousness and a right brain consciousness. Look up a video by C.P.S. Gray called You Are Two, if you will. And basically, it seems like there's two people inside your head. It's the weirdest thing ever, I know, but it does seem true. And this is actually an extension of what the psychoanalysts noticed, is that you have more than one personality inside your head. They brought that stuff up and they suggested that. It sounds wacky, but now you have sort of modern neuroscience finding that if you can split someone's corpus callosum, you can actually, and sort of switch off each brain, you can actually ask someone's left brain a question and then ask their right brain a question and get different answers. You're able to do stuff like this now. And this stuff is absolutely frightening because it means that inside you, there's like two people and you're only really one of them. You're probably closer to what your left brain is, your quote unquote, your ego or something like that.
Right. Sorry to interject very quickly. In regards to the left brain and right brain thing, this is sort of very new to me. When the scientists have tried to interact with these different sides of the brain, what exactly have they deduced from that? Is it sort of like basic consciousness versus unconsciousness, or is it a lot more complicated than that?
It's quite weird, and I am definitely not an expert in this. I'm quite fresh to this. Ian McGilchrist is the place I'd send you if you want to check this stuff out. So forgive me, boyos, like I'm going to be like throwing you in directions, being like, go research this, go research this, or go research this. Although I do advise it. Yeah. But basically, they split these brains and they can ask them questions and deduce. Like literally, it does seem like consciousness. It really does, like separate personalities, if you will. Separate. It's almost like if you imagine a computer with two operating. Oh no, I don't know. Is that a good analogy? Two things doing jobs, if you will. Two modes of observing, right? Okay. And it gives different answers. So I'll give you the example of what they do. They split the brains and then they talk to each of them and they ask each of them, describe yourself. And so the left brain will be like, Steph, brilliant genius, knows all about Jung and psychology, makes great music and has really, really nice hair and everybody likes him. And Max thinks he's a fucking badass, right? And then you'll ask the right brain and the right brain will be really like down to earth. And the right brain will sort of be like, yeah, like Steph, he's all right. He's kind of got a grip on this stuff, but he could be better. He's still got a lot to learn. He's trying his best. He's not like, he's sometimes a bit sloppy. He's a little bit lazy. Max thinks he's all right. Max thinks some of this stuff is interesting. He kind of thinks he talks for too long and all this type of stuff. And it'll be more reasoned. And then you go and ask 5 people who know that person, and they will have descriptions far similar to the right brain. And so what you start to see weirdly is that the right brain seems to have a more in touch with reality perception, and I guess you could say consciousness, than the left brain. The left brain seems to be prone to delusion. This is weird because the left brain seems to also be prone to talking. This is where your Broca's area is and your Wernicke's area is, where your language centers are. It's on your left brain. Whereas the right brain seems to have this sort of silent quality. So I wonder, I'm not sure now, but I wonder if that little voice inside your head, because it's known to be delusional and it's known to kind of big you up and put you down, I wonder, is that perhaps this side of your head, it's very close to Jung's concept of the ego, And I know, to try to skip some steps so I don't spend an hour talking about this stuff. Basically, this left brain thing seems to fit extremely neatly on top of the Cartesian concept of the mind and all of these type of things. And I'll get a lot more into this stuff later. And basically fits it really, really well into ego. And of course, if we're trying to perceive the world properly, what you often need to do is, turn off your ego or turn off your left brain or something like that. And what do we mean by that? Well, the right brain seems to be more in tune with the way the reality is. So we can have a really interesting conversation about, well, how does the right brain see reality? This is actually an extremely, extremely old philosophical way of looking at things. I don't know. Do you follow Heraclitus at all?
Oh no, sir.
Okay, cool. So Heraclitus was the foundation of Western philosophy, and he comes with the thesis that everything is logos. Now, Jesus Christ ended up like becoming logos. So this is a pretty big concept. This is like the mother of all, maybe the father of all concepts. It like biology and sociology, psychology, the ology at the end is all representative of logos. Okay, and so this is the foundational point of it, of all of this stuff. And the idea with Heraclitus is that all of the world is basically flow. What does that mean? Well, it means that everything is sort of, like you go to yoga class and like, everything is connected, feel all the love. It is actually down that direction of thinking. Mm-hmm. Now, how does this have, Steph, what are you talking about, man? I just want to talk about Aion. How does this have any relevance?
It's important, guys. It's important.
How does this have any relevance to Aion or Jung and all that? Again, I want to bring this back to the right brain and the left brain thing. So what we've seen with this is like, all right, Jung and Freud were right. You've got sort of more than one thing going on in your head. You can't really rely on it. And if you want to improve yourself and get to the truth, you need to actually sort this out as one of the major problems. Okay. Now we've kind of brought it down to neuroscience. We're saying, all right, well, here does seem to be the problem. You've got these two personalities. What do they do? Why do we have it this way? Why did we evolve to have these two things this way? And so this is fascinating. When you're doing something, you need to get like caught up in it. And the left brain is full of dopamine receptors. So you need to get like obsessed about it. You need to get all absorbed, entranced by the details. And you don't really need to have this complex Buddhist-like understanding of the nature of reality. When I want to drink out of this cup, I just need to know that it's a cup and I drink out of the cup. I need to categorize it and then get a dopamine kick so that I pull it up to my face and suck. That's all I need to do. It doesn't need to be that much more complicated. But if I was to pull back and be like Heraclitus or the Buddhist, I could sit with this and I could see that this cup was made of china, a rich tradition that probably formed that. There's probably a very immense amount of interesting history. This water came from this pipe that was connected to the earth, which like absorbed all these minerals that were probably like stepped on by dinosaurs at some point. And it all came from the cosmos and the stars at some point. Everything is in some sense connected. This is the Buddhist concept of Indra's web.
Right.
And so what you start to see is that the right brain is tuned actually to see that. That's what it does. It sits there quietly and it kind of pings like a radar and it pays attention to all this stuff and it sees the world is connected. But of course, that's not useful. It's not pragmatic. Like you don't want a load of like idiots sitting around being like, everything's connected, man. You kind of want to do stuff.
Otherwise, you'll just get a bunch of hippies. We saw what happened with that in the 60s.
Basically, man, that was the rise of the right brain, if you know what I mean. And so what the left brain does is it lies. It actually goes against that. It says no. It denies that, okay? It pushes that out. It lies about reality. It reduces reality down into something that's functional, that's useful. And so instead of seeing this for what it is, it just says, no, it's just a cup. Just drink out of the cup. It's nothing more than a cup, and the dopamine takes over. And so we start to see that there's a function here. Now, why would the right brain do this then? Why don't we just all turn into a giant left brain? Because that would be how you win. Well, the left brain can often make mistakes. Say it gets caught up drinking out of the cup, and say someone has poisoned the cup with evil water or something like that. They put in some like clear liquid poison or something like that. Or maybe even just more direct to how things would have worked in nature. Say you're going up to a watering hole to have a drink. And you're there caught up drinking, you're sucking all the good water and all this stuff. This right brain is pinging off the environment. And what it's seeing is everything connected. And it might hear a rustling in the corner and see in the corner of your eye some animals suddenly bounce away. And it puts these patterns together like a giant pattern connecting machine and realizes, oh my God, there's probably a predator coming over there. And it will butt in and push, literally. It will like almost like the way God would come down or an angel would come down and interrupt your reality. It interrupts the left brain and says look up, and so you look up, or you get it takes all this stuff in and creates a mood like danger, and that rises up out of quote unquote the unconscious. Takes your left brain suddenly gets spooked, and then you just run away on instinct. It's like you've got a hunch to do something. Yeah. And it sounds silly, but this is how our brains evolved. Seems to be the way. You've got one that's connected with the world and then another that's connected with the moment. So I'm going to continue going on a tirade. Apologies about this.
No, it's okay. Just can I interject one thing very quickly?
Sure. I was going to ask any thoughts.
Yeah, just in regards to what you're saying about the left brain and the right brain, it's if what you're saying is accurate, and I trust that it is, it seems very like if Jung were around today, I think it would be a positive step in the direction of what he was trying to do with a book like Aion, where he's trying to reconcile the metaphysical with the scientific. He was trying to figure out how to match the patterns of the unconscious with the objective material world. You see that a lot later on in the book. And what you're saying right there, in regards to the left brain sort of being the ego and the right brain sort of having the same functions as the unconscious, the shadow, and the conscience with the self, it seems like those connections are becoming ever closer in our present day. So that's really, really cool.
Yeah, it's really cool, and I do recommend checking out Ian McGilchrist. Again, I would shill him. He's read Jung. He knows Jung well, and he studies studies. You know, he's down to here's experiments. So it is very built into the science. A lot of people will hear about left brain, right brain, and think of like corporate environment and like, oh, the artistic side and the logical side. And that's like completely not true at all. And Ian spent pretty much his life's work and representing that, and he has such a brilliant take. It is just mind-blowing consistently. Master and His Emissary, I recommend you check it out. And actually, that's a good reason to explain this book, to understand what's going on here. Ian says Master and His Emissary because basically the left brain is supposed to be emissary, supposed to be a servant to the right brain. The right brain is like the introverted, wise magician, elder, Brahmin kind of character that sits in the shadows and doesn't do anything. He just observes and he's quiet, but he sees. Very silently he sees. And when there's something wrong, he'll go in and he'll grab the king and say, do this now. And the king should listen to him. But what can happen is that the king can get arrogant and think he knows the whole show and make mistakes. And so this is basically the dynamic going on inside your head. Sorry to say, you are schizophrenic. We all are schizophrenic. That's what's happening.
We just don't realize it.
Yes. And so I say all this because it does have relationship to Aion. I say all this because what you start to see then is that there's one way you can look at the world, which is this sort of left-brained, categorize things, put things into little boxes, simplify things, like what Descartes does. Everything is rational. Everything I can think of how science works. Turn everything into tiny little bits that I can make sense of, and chew everything up into functional, usable tools. Right? It all has these weird symptoms of this sort of left brain that's going on. And that's as we're trying to describe, this is sort of tied to Jung's concept of the ego. It's really, really weird. And we have a serious problem here because we see in the science that the right brain is in touch with reality. Now, how does the right brain see reality? The unconscious, if you want. How does it see reality? It sees it as everything is in flux and connected. This is the same thesis as what Heraclitus had. Now, and forgive me, I'm going to be jumping all around Western philosophy for a second.
Yeah.
But basically, that thesis is a very, very interesting one when you go and look at what Jung considered one of his most treasured influences, more than Nietzsche, was Hegel. I don't know how much Hegel have you checked out?
Right, no, not much, unfortunately.
Okay, cool. Well, Hegel was the guy who came up with the word zeitgeist. I'm not sure if he actually there's my derp mode. I don't think he ever used the word zeitgeist, but people dubbed his work as creating the idea of zeitgeist. Nietzsche probably built his thesis of master morality and slave morality based off Hegel. Marx was a student, I believe, of Hegel himself, or at least loved him. Yeah. Jung considered himself a son of Hegel, Freud the same. So this guy seems to be a big deal. Like, why is he such a big deal? What's going on here? Well, Hegel was, and this is really important for Aion, Hegel had these theories about history. This is why he really captured people's minds. He loved making these big theories about history. And he used to say, and you'll recognize this, he used to say that there would be a thesis or a energy, if you will. And this energy will create its opposite, like Newton, and that's called the antithesis. And these two things will fight, and then they'll unify together. And I think it was called, I don't know, the unite in some sense.
Yeah.
And then, yes, now we're starting to see what's going on.
Connections are being made, yes.
Yes. All right. Now, this is what's interesting about Hegel. Hegel was this radical philosophical break. Like what? And we look at him. We're like, all right, cool idea, bro. Yeah, things have their opposites, and then they join up. Wow, you fucking blew my mind. Like, what? Come on, like, why is this such a big deal? Well, let's place him in his historical context. Why was Hegel such a big deal? Because before that, people had this sort of Cartesian, I'm not sure, Descartes might have been around about this time, but anyway, people had this sort of stiff Enlightenment way of seeing things. There is an objective world. There's one way that you can understand history. It's frozen, it's still in some sense, and it's just, it just is what it is. It's out there, and all that we have to do is look out there, and it will be there like a block that we can grab onto, And you're kind of thinking, all right, Steph, what the hell are you talking about? Well, think about the opposite thesis that Hegel's trying to suggest, is that history is constantly, it's stuck in time, okay, and so it's constantly changing and moving. Right? And so and this is a really important point, what we make the mistake of doing when we think that history or the world out there is frozen and still is we think that we can just pop categories onto it and they'll be perfect. Nietzsche talks about this too. You think you can just look out at the world and say that is good and that is bad.
Right.
And that's just perfect. You've categorized it perfectly. It's like what the left brain does. It looks at this and it says, that's a cup. I've categorized that properly, and I'm never, ever, ever going to have to recategorize that. Not to say if one day I need to put yogurt into it and it turns into a bowl. That can't happen because I've categorized it. But of course, if we think logically, yes, I can turn that into a bowl anytime I want, and things can change. The category certainly can change. And this is what Hegel started to notice, is that as we're going through time, he started to see the more fundamental reality is that our categories have to attach to something that's always changing. So our categories are not reliable. His right brain was starting to kick into gear here, looking at the world like Heraclitus, everything is always changing. Everything is logos. Looking at the way the right brain sees starts to kick into gear. Now, what is the philosophical revolution that he does? He said the correct way to categorize things is to actually try label patterns, label movements, label things that are moving. That's more accurate. What does he mean by this? So basically, if you say this is again, forgive me for the jumping around and philosophical history, but Nietzsche says good and bad are useless. That's like saying this is a cup. Instead, what we need to do is we need to look underneath these and find the fundamental forces that are moving all of history, moving all of society. People say that it's the good versus the evil, frozen categories. The good people are the people who are nice. The evil people are the people who are bad. Nietzsche digs underneath that. He pulls apart the left brain and then he looks at it with his right brain as it is. And then he takes his left brain back in and reconceptualizes correctly, right? And this is what he starts to see with this idea of master morality and slave morality. He says these are better categories because they are forces. They are not frozen, stiff ideas that don't really make any sense. And they are forces that you can detect throughout any era, Yeah. And this is what Hegel's starting to push towards. Okay, so this is now a very, very interesting thesis. I hope you can follow. So I'm after hitting the accelerator pedal there a bit. Tell me, have you any thoughts or any ideas yourself?
Well, actually, yeah, don't feel too bad. Like the intelligence of my viewers tends to be quite heightened, just like yours. So don't worry about it too much. But in regards to what you're saying about the thesis and antithesis, that's why I think it's better to take a more like pragmatist view of morality, because as you say, things can change their identity over time and are constantly evolving, just like the world around you is evolving. So you got to make sure that nothing becomes too entrenched, otherwise it can be corrupted. It's sort of like Jordan Peterson's constant discussion of the hierarchy. The hierarchies are useful, but sometimes they can evolve to become corrupt, and so you need that opposing force to make sure that things are kept in check. And so you could sort of extrapolate that to pretty much all of reality in a sense. It's sort of like what Clementine did in regards to viewing the entire world as syzygies, and in regards to Jung, obviously, in regards to how he seems to view the world. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's like the sort of bridge, I guess, where we can start talking about Jung, because everything I'm sort of presenting here is this idea that if you were to, in some sense, if you were to do philosophy right, what you'll realize is that you will come into it with this first principle, which is that, you have these frozen categories, and it's just about telling people that they're ignorant and that they don't understand your categories. Mm-hmm. And then over time, you'll mature and realize that things are incredibly complex. And often that a big group of left brains together, which is what we call society, impose categories on things, and they freeze them, and they think that that's just the absolute truth and reality.
Right. So let's try to bridge things here a little bit. So you brought up Descartes, you brought up Nietzsche. Obviously, Descartes' most notable contribution to the world of philosophy is the statement, "I think, therefore I am," and that is that was the assumption that there's only one thing that you can be assured of in regards to what is true, and that was what he came up with in the early 1600s. But then Nietzsche comes along and he said, "Well, hold on a second. How can you be so sure that it's just you that's thinking? How do we know it's not something else?" And basically the conclusion that he comes to, just to summarize, is that maybe it's better to not think of it's you that's thinking, but just something is thinking. And so Jung goes and takes that and he says, and it sort of goes along with what you're saying about the left brain and the right brain, there is more than just one part of you. There's these other parts of you that aren't within your control and are guiding your action, and you got to figure out which parts are not you and which parts are you. And that's sort of the foundation of Aion and where he builds up from.
And so this is what is interesting about Jung, is that he's obviously someone who's very, very versed in all this stuff. He's doing the philosophy thing right. He's doing the psychology thing right. He's kind of getting a good grip on these things. He's entertaining these ideas in a very fresh way. He's a son of Hegel, and he starts to work on himself and realize that, all right, my mind is very unreliable. He's maybe looking at these things that we would now categorize as left brain, right brain, and seeing that there's a huge amount of problems. There's this unconscious mind that dictates a lot of things. There's this almost like super ordinate, super observable power inside of us that's the self, and maybe that's the deep right brain or something. I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
But what he starts to do then is that he starts to realize that these forces, like the psychology, the left brain and the right brain, if you will, these things were present all throughout history.
Yeah.
And these things are not trivial. These things are not like, and remember, Nietzsche was saying master morality and slave morality are forces. That's why they're reliable categories, right? Jung is now looking at the mind and realizing that, ego or left brain, if you will, and unconscious or right brain are actually forces, because the human decisions are power. That's what drives things in the world, and what drives human decisions is the mind, and the way the mind works is the most important thing here. So if we have these two conscious characters, if you will, or conscious personalities, and again the science kind of backs this up, then we have two forces operating throughout history, which are present in the human mind. One is the left brain, one is the right brain. And so this becomes extremely weird, because Jung starts to look back through history and he starts to sort of see the patterns a little bit. He starts to see this stuff going on.
Yeah.
And in some sense, he sees what we could call the pattern recognition superpower of the right brain. This ability, as I said, its basic ability would be to notice the rustling leaves, the running away animals, the flying off birds, and deduce a conclusion from that. But he extends that and says, well, this pattern recognition mind, it can probably do a lot more. Yeah. And so he looks throughout history and he sees that this weird, the collective unconscious, as he called it, or the unconscious and all this, the symbols that people were writing about in their sort of, very artistic, right brain way, they were writing them in all these books. And what you were constantly seeing is that, symbols would come up together around about the same time, and then really, really big historical events would happen.
Yeah.
Like you would be drawing fish at a certain time, and the fish would be like the savior fish, and all that stuff would go together, and it's weird, and it's like, why is it coming up? Why does it even seem relevant? And then Jesus pops up. Yeah. And you kind of sit back and you look at this, and it's like, well, that mind was pretty fucking good at picking that stuff out. Like, and it's not like these people were writing these symbols knowing what they were doing.
Yeah.
It was like, yeah. Sorry?
No, I was going to say, I was just agreeing with you, but yeah, you're right. It's just, that's one of the most terrifying elements of Aion, is just Jung's observation. Yet there is some sort of force within our mind, within our psyche, that is controlling the way that we function and the way that the world functions, both the material and immaterial. And what Jung was attempting to do was trying to figure out, okay, what are the operating functions of that unconscious? And what you do see, as you just laid out there, is references to both the prevalence of opposites in all of creation, our tendency to project those ambivalent qualities onto fish, which we'll get into, and also, as you mentioned, how the self is sort of like the deep right brain. It's the conscience, it's the guiding pull inside the deep unconscious, inside the deep right brain that's guiding you. So, God, I can't believe we brought all that full circle.
Yeah. I'm like I kept on saying I'm sorry about jumping around, but I do think it's actually powerful context for all this stuff. These are the things I've been chewing on since I finished doing my version of the series. So looking at you doing it, I was kind of all these new ideas were jogging in my mind. I was like, oh my god, that's what's going on.
Yeah, you're always
And
peeling back the layers. It's like Shrek
yes,
says.
yes, yeah, the mind onion, if you will.
Exactly.
And so, like, a series I'm doing right now on my channel is the Red Book, and I recommend you check that out because I talk about this stuff probably in better depth over there. So if you are interested in this, check it out. But basically, what happened with Jung with the Red Book is that he essentially had what we called a psychotic break. Now, what was happening with the psychotic break? So his little left brain, little ego, his little eggshell mind, that thinks it knows everything, that knows that this is a cup, that knows that this is a cup, it fractures. And what happens is the big, powerful right brain invades and injects it with it's basically its will, And this is weird. And remember, the kind of thesis underneath this is that your left brain has a sort of personality or consciousness, and so does your right brain. And the right brain sits like this powerful magician in the corner and doesn't do anything until it decides it needs to interrupt you for some reason. And for some reason, it chose to bully into Jung's. And as I said, that is a perfectly rational basis. There's a fucking lion, so it's going to warn you, stop drinking the water and run away. It's going to make you do something. But then, like with Jung in the Red Book, it was just maybe a bit more psychological. Like he had become a bit stiff and academic and taking himself too seriously, and the right brain decided to bully in a little bit and show him more interesting sides of himself and whatnot, and give him a sort of counter thesis as to the scientific paradigm at the time. But basically what happens there is the right brain invades, and before that happened there was all these dreams. Like before it really took him in the Red Book, you read through the Red Book and realize before he really got possessed by the right brain, or before it started to invade him to the point where he was having visions and with his eyes open and all this stuff, he would have sort of dreams that would hint at this stuff. And this is similar to what I was getting at, but that idea of the fish will show up in symbols and all that before something happens. It's almost like your right brain is there jogging through all this associative way of thinking. It's happening at the same time. It's really, really weird. All right. So before Jung's coming up to this big crisis moment in his life where his ego is going to get destroyed, he's having all these little patterns getting introduced to him. And all you have to do then, and this is just a tiny little leap, and it makes sort of rational sense. All you have to do is you have to scale that. Okay. So with Jung, in order for his left brain to get updated by his right brain, all these patterns are going to come in and invade. Now imagine if you have, as I said, a huge culture full of people who are all operating with their left brain, because the left brain is a force. As we said before, it's a part of your mind. And then you have all these people who also have a right brain as well. And the right brain is showing up perhaps in the arts or in these very subtle ways that you don't quite notice. So we read history and we read the left brain facts, like guy kills guy, empire starts, trade starts, invention happens, blah, 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 blah. But obviously what was also happening at the time was all this literature and this art and basically the dreams of the culture that was going on at the time. And if you start studying that stuff, you start to see almost like the right brain talking to the left brain of the people, if you follow what I'm saying here. And this starts to, if you study this, you can start to see it's almost like the collective right brain making decisions or noticing. So as I said, it's like the collective right brain is sitting there and the collective left brain is there doing history, lapping up the water in the lake. And the collective right brain is noticing all these patterns going on around it, trying to detect lions basically, and trying to introduce them back to the left brain. And so if you study those patterns, Jung noticed that you get a sort of coherent sort of story about history, as if, dare I say it, as if there's sort of someone, as if there's an intelligence trying to push history in a certain direction. Let's put it that way.
And sorry, I really got to interrupt you. I apologize, but just it's like what you're saying here about how he's outlining sort of the course of the last 4,000 years and trying to outline the patterns of the unconscious. I don't think there's anybody else in history that actually made an attempt to do this and actually did so with any, convincing evidence to put together. And I think that's significant because I think, I'm not sure if you remember this, if you watched all the way to the end of my series, but at the end, I made a note of what Edward Edinger said. He did the Aion lectures, sort of Edinger was trying to do what I did, which is simplify Jung's material for everybody. And in that book, he made a note of a particular dream that Jung had. And I'm not sure if this is in the Red Book, so please let me know. But in this dream that Jung had, where he made a confrontation with the unconscious, he made a confrontation with Salome and Elijah from the Bible, and there was a serpent with them. And while interacting with Salome, Salome started worshiping Jung, and he's like, "Why the hell are you doing this?" And she said, "It's because you're Christ." And he's like, okay, no, not so much. But then what happens is the snake goes up to Jung and starts pressing him, like just encircling him and pressing him in his coils. And he starts to transform into this godlike being. He turns, to use what you said before, he takes on the head of a lion, he sprouts wings. And apparently why this is all significant is there's an image of the Mithraic god Aion at the very beginning of Aion.
Yeah.
And the Mithraic god Aion looks exactly like the thing that Jung was turning into. And Edinger's interpretation of this was that what Jung was, what the unconscious is trying to tell Jung is that he is going to be the harbinger of the new Aion. He was the only one that can take all this material and present it to people and try to bring significance to, hey, there is an underlying way that the universe functions, and if you pay attention to it and recognize it and work in harmony with it, then you can be savior figures. It could be synonymous with the self.
Yep, that's such a good take. There's so much to get into.
I know. It's so enlightening, but it's also so terrifying because it's like you discovered the treasure that the dragon is hiding in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I'm trying my best to formulate a rational foundation for people to look into this stuff. Because I think the thesis, if you can trace it, I might have done a bad job explaining it. I think there's actually pretty decent theories underneath this to sort of see what Jung was trying to do. Now, never mind his conclusions, but you see why he's approaching it this way, why he takes this stuff serious.
Yeah. Because
he's looking at it like this sort of collective right brain studying history and what patterns you can deduce from that. And exactly what you're saying, on a personal level, all right, you dismiss your dreams, you dismiss your fantasies and all that stuff as nonsense because you've fallen into the Cartesian mind of the cup's a cup and I'll just make rational decisions because that's what I'm so good at. And yeah, I've read Freud, but I don't actually take Freud serious because I'm stuck in my zeitgeist, if you know. But the thing is that the right brain thing suggests that it's not only that your ego is something you have to humble. Your ego is actually less competent in some sense than the right brain at doing the right brain's job, which is to sort of see the world properly and understand it as Heraclitus understood it, as everything's in flow. That's the truth in some sense. And it makes rational sense. Everything is always, change is the only constant. We are in yoga class here, aren't we? And that type of thing. And so basically, as you're saying, if you look at this process and look at it throughout history, you'll see that, and this is Hegel and Nietzsche. Nietzsche says you must have a historical sense. Hegel says you must deal with the patterns, the waves, the thesis and antithesis, the zeitgeist you're dealing with. You must adapt to your reality, and in some sense, surf your wave, surf what's happening in your moment. And so understanding history is actually unbelievably important because you can't just think that I want to go back to medieval Christianity or something like that, or I live in the Marxist future or something like that. You live right where you live right now. And the thing that actually understands where you are could be this sort of right brain. Your little right brain is so good at pattern orientation that it actually probably knows more than you know, which is your little left brain and all this. And so it's all kind of weird and confusing and all that, but Jung uses it to just postulate an idea. Just say, look, the psychology, if we study this stuff from what we know about the quote unquote unconscious or what I would call the right brain, you actually get a pretty coherent view of things in some sense that it seems that history is getting pushed in some direction. And as you said with the Mithras thing, we had eras. Now, let's get into ions and eras. Okay. So basically, the way that the world works is, you could even look at this in a very blunt way. weaponry just dictates who will have power and the way things are going to operate. So back before basically Jesus, you had everybody, you needed a chariot and you needed an army in order to be the highest status person. And so this is the era of Aries, the ram, the aggressive, fiery energy in astrology. And this is the Roman, the view of the Rome's leading god was Mars. That's a war god. Mars was Aries for the Greeks. So this whole era was dictated by martial energy. That's the thing that ruled. It was the law of the jungle, if you will.
Yeah.
And then what happens is humanity scales in some sense. So the Aion changes. Humanity scales to the point where, all right, you've got so many people now that managing them with weapons is actually inefficient. It's like if you make too many martyrs, eventually you'll have an army against you. You persuade too many people. Violence is not a good way to rule. This is actually Foucault who saw this as well.
Yeah.
Basically, what you start to see is that the new Aion, new era, is going to have to be ruled by far more like intelligent ways of doing things, which would be operate in a sort of Christ-like give or take community thing
in a very meek way. Instead of the past Aion where you use your sword to control people, you keep them sheathed, but use them when you need to.
Boom, 100%, 100%. And the idea is about morality and morality in what that meant in that context in that time. Like that was really sensible. It's like, all right, well, the way we're going to keep things together now for the next 1,000 years, and they weren't thinking this consciously, but it's just, all these forces come together to mean that society is scaled to such a point that Christianity is the most rational way to move forward. And so this is what dictates this. And then what happens with us is that society keeps scaling because we're successful, and it keeps scaling and it keeps scaling, and eventually gets so big and technology moves along with it. So maybe actually I said with the military, it was like, who had the chariot, who had the weapons would be the one who wins. If you study the Indo-European people, you'll find some frightening statistics, such as there's not a single pre-Aryan male DNA in any of the Spanish population, but there is female, because the people who had the chariots went into Spain, and these are the Indo-Europeans, and they killed every single male in Spain and then took all the girls, and that's what created the modern Spanish in some sense. And so whoever had the weapons did frightening psychopathic things. Like that's literally the foundation of that whole nation, if you will. And that's long past in the history. And then obviously Christianity comes, and Christ is Christ is the most famous celebrity of all time. Like he completely dominated. Everybody falls under his whim in some sense. And maybe the church was the technology there. Maybe that's a new technology, this type of a building or something like that. It's interesting. It's hard to know what to make of this stuff. But then technology scales. And what's this new technology we start to see? Well, we start to see stuff like mass media, the printing press. That comes up around about 1600. You start to see all these new things. And suddenly there's a new way that we have to coordinate ourselves. With the rise of the printing press, this new way of talking, what do we start to see? The almost immediate subversion of the church and Christianity with the Enlightenment. And the kings, the divine right of kings, the church and Christianity, all that stuff gets pulled straight out. And then we get this replaced with essentially atheism. What we have with Napoleon is the liberal, fraternal, equal ideas and all this.
Yeah.
We have a new Aion that comes in. And we're currently living through this transition, I guess, in some sense. So if you have any thoughts on that before I kind of...
Well, everything that you said there is sort of predicated on viewing the world in astrological terms, because as we saw in Chapter 5 and Chapter 6 of Aion, what Jung was trying to do is try to map the movement of the stars along with how history transpired. So as you were saying there, with going with Christ to the church, to moving away from the church, to sort of in the middle of the Christian Aion, because you had all the heresies and the Cathars and Joachim Flora, and then you go into the middle of the around the 1500s, where alchemy started to come about, which is sort of the meeting of spiritualism and materialism, where they were trying to interpret the world in spiritual terms. But then unfortunately, depending on how you view it, atheism and enlightenment and evolutionary theory came in, and that spiritual element completely got overturned by the anti-Christian sentiment, with the science and all that. And as we saw, as Jung tried to point out in Chapter 6, I believe it was, you could see how all these key events transition from a Christian way of viewing the world to an anti-Christian way of viewing the world, cluster around these nodal points. So at the beginning of the Aion of Pisces, which is the Christian Aion, you have the advent of Christ, obviously, and then in the middle of that 1,000 years, you had the establishment of the church, and then moving on, and so on, as you said, and that's sort of excuse me, inherent to the patterns that are in the unconscious. This is what Jung was trying to establish. He was trying to show how there is a greater pattern. Like, you know what I'm trying to say, right?
Yeah.
Pattern to everything here.
Yes, and it's extremely weird. It's extremely weird because this is where things kind of get wacky. Like, this is genuinely the wacky thesis, and I think Jung is actually just like, I don't think Jung's saying, guys, we must take astrology serious. He's sort of saying, guys, like, I'm just looking at this from everything we just talked about. He has this proto conception of the right brain and all this stuff. He realizes this pattern recognition power of the brain is incredibly serious. We should take care of it. As Ian McGilchrist says, it actually turns out to be smarter than our left brain. And so Jung's taking it serious. He's giving it his credence, and he starts to look, and he starts to see that, all right, all this, our pattern recognition institutions, art and literature, and revelations and all this crap and all, and mass irrational movements, Joachim of Flora and all this stuff, and these big movements and all this stuff. He's looking at that, and he's being like, it's kind of it's weirdly matching. I don't know why, but it's weirdly matching to, of all fucking things, astrology. All right, it just does. All right. And then what you do is you just run with sort of, well, what you're going to do here is you're going to project out into the future. You're going to say, okay, fuck, all right. It goes against everything I've been taught as like a millennial scientist, but well, maybe Jung wasn't one of those, but maybe, okay, I'll just go with it. I'll just see what happens.
Yeah, and that's what you have to do with Aion. You sort of just have to let Jung make his point before you try to make those judgments, because otherwise it's impossible to really grasp what he's saying. And I sort of had that moment myself when I was reading Aion, because I was sort of with him, but then when this is the first time that I tried reading it, but then he got to chapter 6 and he's talking about astrology. It's, what? But what he's saying is just exactly like you said. He's like, I'm not saying that we need to take astrology seriously as a proper mechanism that we can use to interpret the world in the future. But look at this. Look at how all the events in history seem to coincide with the fact that our astrological forefathers projected all the stuff into the sky, and a lot of that stuff seems to coincide with what was happening on Earth. So, for example, you mentioned the Aion of Aries. When that was expiring, Aries is symbolized by a ram, and Christ, right when he came around, he was also symbolized not as a ram but as a sheep. It's the same family, right? He's the shepherd, and then as the Aion went on, his symbolism started to morph from being a sheep into that of a fish, because the Aion of Pisces, the Christian Aion, is symbolized by fish, and there's all this fish symbolism that surrounds Christ. And why fish of all things? Well, maybe it has something to do with our astrological history. And go ahead.
Well, this is just a brilliant opportunity now to talk about the Christ as the self and what that means.
Yes.
So basically, like, let's take this, let's assume me and you are like war generals, all right? And we're looking at all this stuff. We're like, why are we reading Jung? But we're looking at all this stuff because we're intent on winning the game. We want to be the winners. We want to be on top.
We want to be the water carriers. But we'll get to that in a minute.
And so basically what's going on with the Romans is that the Romans are sitting around there at their little campfire, and they're kind of all like drinking wine as they used to do. And they're saying, well, how do we win? And so in our paradigm, in our Aion, the way we win is by being tough, being bad boys, being the best, being the martial guys. So Mars gets popped up. So the idea, the image of the ideal, the image of the self is Aries, is Mars, same god, Greek and Roman, Aries, Mars, all right? So that's what they put up. And that's the ram. That's the thick-headed, aggressive ram and all this. As we said, that was good for that time, but as society scaled, the way to win became more about, coherent, strong communities that were working together, So everybody as this unit. We moved away from perhaps the individualistic Romans into a little bit more of a hive and all that. But it still was all about coherence and everybody working together as a team, and everybody believing the same thing in some sense, and believing in the goodness of a man who sacrifices himself for everybody else, right? That type of thing. So what we see is that transition. We see that move away from Aries the warlord Mars, and we see it moving towards like what Jesus represents to most people. Like, the Jordan Peterson frame, a nice guy, a guy who sort of takes the punch in the face and stands up and keeps walking and carries his cross, man, and keeps on going no matter what, man. Responsible, man. And that's basically what you get. And it's weird. It is weird, I admit, that coincides nearly flawlessly with Aries the ram, Christ as the lamb, Christ as the fish. And I don't know, like it's just weird, but it does. And that's when those transitions happen. And of course, Christ saying stuff like, I will be the first and I will be the last. And that's also, if you look at astrology, Aries is the start of the zodiac and Pisces is the end. And weirdly, astrology moves backwards. So Christ was actually the first and the last. He came right at that tension point.
I never even thought of that. God damn it.
I don't know, bro. I don't know. And as I said, like Jung's in some sense looking at this with this sort of idea that, right, I'm going to trust the right brain here. And this is what you start seeing. I don't know what it means, but you can see the rational side of it. It is a transition into a new way that we're going to operate society in some sense. And so what goes on is that people start to attach their identity to Jesus because that's the most powerful way of seeing things. And this is the weirder thing, is that in Jesus's ideas, just like the lamb was seeded in the fish, you also have this suggestion about stones. Like, what? Jung starts talking about stones, and you're like, what am I fucking reading, man? What do you mean stones? What? Why is this relevant? So basically, Peter is going to be the rock that you build the church upon. All right. And who was the other one? I think they all used to say that Jesus was like the rock, the stone. That was you think about it, the heaviest thing that grounded you. So we move through this chaotic era where Rome falls, man. That'd be like if America fell now. Imagine how crazy things would be. And so people would be looking for an ideology, something to stabilize things. A religion would be perfect. And so they find this guy Jesus, and it's working, and the people who follow Jesus have the strongest communities. And he becomes the stone that holds everything together. He's the anchor. You hear a girl say it to her boyfriend. It's like, oh, you're my rock. I can rest on you and all that. And Jesus kind of becomes this. But he's also mainly the fish. And so the Pope and the priest, if you look at the priest, they're like, they're dressed like fish. It's extremely weird, but it's there. Mm-hmm. It's right in your face. It's there. But then the stone hint is there. And so we go through the next 2,000 years. And that's the Jesus Aion. And gradually throughout those 2,000 years, again, what we would like is that it's frozen. We got Christianity correct and it's perfect. We got it good. Or we got it, there you go, perfect. Left brain ideology right there. Christianity circa 300 AD when the Romans established it. Perfect, flawless. But then what we look with Hegel and Jung and all that is that these things evolve and we must adapt to the evolution. So Jung is trusting this right brain, looking for these patterns. As you said, Joachim of Flore comes up. I'm going to skip that one just for the sake of time. Yeah. And I'm going to go into what starts to appear. So remember I brought up stones and you brought up the Protestant Revolution, or maybe you didn't, but basically that happens around about 1600. That actually also happens around about the time that alchemy starts getting.
Yeah.
Okay, and so tell me, what is the goal of alchemy?
It's to find the philosopher's stone.
To find the philosopher's stone. Now that becomes extremely weird. Why is this stone so fucking relevant? Like, what's going on here? Like, I don't get it. It's Jung stuff. This is kind of strange. What's going on? But Jung just kind of looks at it and he's like, okay, guys, don't tell me I have to get into alchemy now, do I? Okay, all right. I'm going to look at what's going on with alchemy.
All right, let's do it. Yeah.
Alchemy reveals itself as a similar thing. It's almost like, the Jews had sort of completed the story of the Bible, or maybe not the Jews, but we'll say Judaism as a sort of culture had reached its cadence in Jesus. So it's an amazing, like it's such a almost like beautiful work of art. As Jordan Peterson says, it's all hyperlinked together because it opens up all these possibilities and all these symbols. And, in the Garden of Eden, Eve is going to give birth to a Messiah who is going to get bitten by evil, but also kill evil at the same time. And then what do we have with Christ? Only the completion of that. A being who is bitten by evil, but kills evil at the same time, defeats evil through his own death. Basically, you have that. It's like this complete story. And so all the symbols opened up possibilities and then they closed. And then what Jung is looking at with the same pattern recognition thing, weirdly, like he's seeing that, oh my God, all these new possibilities are getting opened up. And one of them seems to be this fucking stone. And so he's looking at this stone and it's appearing in alchemy and it's getting replaced with this idea of the image of the self. And so it's weird, I know, but remember the Romans sat around and said, how do I win? Okay, I become Mars and then I'll be great, I'll be class. And then you're in the time of Christ. How do I win? How do I? So the idea about Rome is how do I? And this is so strange, man. How do I live forever? How do I live forever as a Roman, as a pagan? What's the pagan idea of Rome? What did Achilles say? You know, the kid says to Achilles in the movie Troy, he's like, how I wouldn't be brave enough to fight any men and fight men like you. And Achilles turns around and says, that's why no one will remember your name. And the whole thesis of pagan is that if your name manages to live forever, then you live forever. There's almost this attachment to your name.
Yeah.
And the way you live forever, Heraclitus, here's like Heraclitus' statement, is you live forever essentially through the eternal glory of man, leaving your soul's impression on the eternal glory of man. There's this belief that your name and your memory is almost like your spirit in some sense. And that's the Roman idea, you know, that's the pagan Roman idea. So immortality is attached to bravery and courage and virtue. Very, very powerful way of seeing things. But then Christ, the immortality is attached to Christ. It's attached to being Christian. It's attached to being the good guy, attached to living like that. But then with alchemy, what you start to see long before any of the shit that's going on nowadays, you start to see this idea that if you can make the perfect stone, you can live forever. That's what the philosopher's stone is. If you can create the stone properly, you can live forever. Now, tell me what the project of science sort of secretly is. Aren't we all doing this science thing because all these transhumanists are saying if we can rearrange matter properly, we can figure out this, you know, the world of stones, matter, we can live forever. There's this new goal, this new purpose and all that. And if you think about, we went from Rome with Mars and the warrior, and we went from Jesus and living forever as like the son of, or the being of Christ and going up into heaven. Now we're moving towards this new way of trying to do this, where we're saying you will live forever as if you become a transhuman. Nietzsche's Ubermensch, you know, if you become a transhuman, if you rearrange your body and articulate yourself, turn yourself into Iron Man or something like that, and defeat death through the work of science in some sense. And of course, the kernels of this transition were happening with alchemy. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I've always found that quite interesting.
Well, that actually, what you just said there about Iron Man kind of blew my mind. Maybe that's why so many people tend to really appreciate that character. I always just thought it was Robert Downey Jr.'s charisma, and that is certainly a part of it, but also just the fact that it is sort of the perfection of man, the ideal man that is sort of encased within the material, like, you know what I mean? Like just a combination of the material world with the soul inside the stone. It's the water that emerges from the rock when Moses struck it in the desert.
And take that just one step further and tell me what is a so okay, first of all, matter is stones, but if you dissolve matter down into its minerals, you basically get metal, and with metal you get technology. Now tell me the problem with technology. The problem is that it's dead. So the opposite of dead is life. Actually, the extreme opposite of dead is eternal, is ever living, is immortality. Yeah. So tell me, what is an artificial machine? What is artificial intelligence? Only it is a set of minerals that have no life at all, that have been recombined in such a way that they have life. And this is also the other, or maybe it's connected in some sense. We have this Nietzschean transhuman Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man, who's like, you know, is Elon Musk going to do it? Is he going to upload his consciousness into a machine body and fly to Mars himself to leave us all behind because we can't stop rioting? He's going to be like, all right, fuck them. Like, I'm going to go myself. And then is that combining in some sense with this other will, this other great desire? You heard Kurzweil say, do you believe in God? And Kurzweil says, not yet. Do you think God exists? And he says, not yet. So this idea that we're going to redeem matter and bring life into it. And that's the philosopher's stone in the same way. That's the living stone. That's literally what they used to describe it as, the living stone. And you've got this unbelievable pattern from alchemy that's actually coming true now. Jung didn't know any of this stuff. This wasn't really a thing when Jung was writing this book. You know, there was hints of it. But now we're sitting in the 60 to 70 year aftermath. And, you know, me and you were kind of looking at each other being like, yeah, there's something to that. I don't know what it is. Again, you know, I want to have some type of career in the intellectual sphere of some sort. But
we don't want people thinking we're mystics and all that. But yeah, you're right. It's just, and that's, you know, I was wondering at the beginning of all this, like, how are you going to try and unite alchemy with AI? But what you actually just said there makes perfect sense. And it sort of connects to something that a whole bunch of people have been asking me in the comment sections of the Aion videos regarding AI. At the beginning of the Christian era, we had Christ. And there's been an anticipation that at the end of the Christian era, after, we from 1000 AD to 2000 AD, the anti-Christian sentiment is going to be fulfilled. Once the end of that comes, what form will it take? Well, maybe it's AI, right? Because with AI, by mastering the material world and trying to birth life out of it, we can create some sort of perfection that sort of literally and metaphorically mimics the perfection of Christ. That is some scary shit right there.
Yeah, man. And this is a really difficult, like, if we're going to give Jung his Steelman here, right? And we're going to say give him his fair due, right? So if we think about this and see what he's trying to suggest here, he's trying to suggest that if you study these patterns as like a Hegelian, you're looking at these historical patterns and these are forces of psychology, and you're saying to yourself, okay, these are all directing towards something. They're all pushing towards something. If you were, living in Rome and you stubbornly decided to stay with the Martian energy and ran around being Mars, you would have gotten left behind. And Christianity would have swarmed over your culture. This is exactly what happened, and taken it. The last place to be Martian, to follow Mars, was Martian. Is so funny considering that means alien now. But anyway, the last place to have Mars people was the warriors and all that, was in the army. And these are the Romans who got left behind. And the right thing for you to do would be to adapt to what's happening. Get on board with what's going on. Now, this is actually just a little bit of trivia. And the competing religion to Christ was actually this god called Mithras that you brought up earlier. And the cult of Mithras is what they did in the army. It was an exclusively high status male way of doing things. And basically it was the exact same thing. It was this sacrifice of the bull god, I believe. And it was sort of like a warrior cult and a male initiation of some sort. You can think of it probably operated a lot like the way Freemasonry probably works nowadays. It was kind of obscured, and you didn't really get into it. Like, it was more like an old gentleman's club and all this type of stuff. And it eventually got bullied out by Christianity. But that was the last gasps of Roman energy, if you will. It's interesting Jung puts that on the front cover of the book. I still don't know what he's trying to suggest there. Maybe he's being like, maybe he's sporking or something like that, telling us to get back to Rome. I don't know. I would love that, but I'm not sure if that's what he means.
Yeah.
But anyway, if you're adapting to your patterns and your reality, you're like, all right, this is what's going on. Don't get left behind. Become a Christian, basically. Get on board with it. And this becomes kind of scary. I don't know what to make of this, right? Revelations comes and suggests, yeah, this is good, but it will one day end. Jung reads this as well. And so he finds all this stuff about the anti-Christian age. And that's a hard thing for us to kind of digest, because it's clearly come to pass. Like, it's clearly happening right now. And as we said, the image of the ideal self, the image of the savior, the image of the way to get to immortality is transitioning with it. And it's a sort of materialist idea. It's extremely scary as well. And why is it scary? Well, basically, it's turning around and saying that the Christ-like salvation of your soul is going to be achieved through technology. And what does that mean? Right?
Well, can I offer an idea as to what that could possibly mean, actually?
Well, I've 3 or 4. So I guess just to kind of put the point here, and then definitely go for it. Okay. What this leaves us with is, if we're kind of to do this thing Jung is doing, we have all these patterns that are showing up. And if we actually use this in a functional way, we can actually look at these patterns and say to ourselves, how do we actually produce a possible future, and then adapt our behavior to do that? If we're living at the end of Rome, how do we make sure that we're not on the wrong team, the failing team? How do we make sure we're not worshiping Mars while clearly everyone else is going after Christianity? That type of thing. So, what were you saying?
Well, you're saying that in regards to how we're going to sort of survive, I suppose, in the new Aion, and trying to make the marriage between the spiritual and the material, be it with AI, and how alchemy was a forerunner of that. I actually have a proposal to put forward, and I'd like to know what you think of this. And oddly enough, I'm going to use video games to try and justify my point, but bear with me. So one of my most famous videos on my YouTube channel is called The Most Profound Moment in Gaming History. And it's a moment from a video game called Metal Gear Solid 2. And basically, there's a point in that game where the main character comes face to face with the villain, and the villain tries to make the case that human beings as themselves are so flawed in terms of trying to figure out what information is true in the internet age. this is very relevant because of like the problem of fake news and how people are always at each other's throats right now. There's this AI, the villain, that talks to the main character saying, because human beings suck so much at trying to get the good information to progress forward, we are going to tyrannize you and pick out the good information for you. And that's a very powerful argument. And ever since the game came out in 2001, but I didn't really actually appreciate what it all meant until I was about 16 years old back in 2010. And ever since then, that problem has been haunting me. And it's especially a problem for me now because with everything that's going on right now in the age of Trump and everybody just seeing like the people on the opposite end of the political spectrum as the worst possible human beings, this whole nightmare is starting to come true. But there is another video game that offers a potential solution to all this, and it's a game that came out a year before Metal Gear Solid 2, and it's a game called Deus Ex. And
I've heard this,
yeah. And at the very end of the game, it sort of deals with the same problem about how, you know, human beings and how they should be controlled. Should they be allowed to live freely? Should there be some sort of government overseer? Maybe they should be ruled by an AI. But the solution that is put forward is that human beings merge with technology. And by merging the human brain with technology, we can reach higher levels of consciousness and become more synonymous with the self. What do you think of that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh. Now like let me crack the fucking. I don't know. Let's get the proper hard liquor out now. Yes. Like now we can start talking about possibilities, and so I think that is a extremely interesting one because I think the meme is that Skynet will come about. You know, Skynet's going to come and it's going to be like it's going to turn around and be like, you were not taking care of the environment and you castrated all your dogs. I really don't like that. Now it's time to delete you, Mr. Humans, and then it's just gone, all of you. And we do fear that, and like it could happen. Like there's this is one possibility. We obsess about this living stone. We're like, make the living stone. We build these huge institutions, like the way that Richard Dawkins looks at the irrationality of Christians and say they build fucking churches to this guy on a stick. Like what's going on? The fools. Like what were they thinking? But then obviously psychology never changes. They're forces in reality, and so we have this new psychology, which is like the living stone, man. Max, how's it getting on? How's your study in the living stone getting on? I've actually like worked with people, who I used to do English teaching, and I was a language teacher, so they'd work with me on machine learning and stuff like that. And so I'd sit there and I kind of talk to them about like programming the living stone, and it was always so interesting just the way they saw the technology, because these guys would be like deep in it, these PhD academics and all this stuff, like working on this stuff were crazy, and all the universities, it's all institutions towards creating the machine, and these guys would all have their reservations. It's like, we must avoid making the machine this specific way because then it'll have this bad thing. And it looks literally like we are sort of putting together, like digging our own grave. Like we could very much put together a giant machine, and it could turn around and like turn it on, and there could have been a couple of flaws in the coding, or worse, imagine if it was perfect and it saw reality exactly as it was and said, "You're the problem, you humans, delete," or something like that. Yeah. That could happen.
And then you get the Matrix.
You get the fucking Matrix, man. Like, and that's one possibility. And so, like, let's put that on the table for a second. That's one way we can look at this. So we're looking at all these patterns. We're looking at the psychology. So human beings as the force. This weird thing about the living stone has risen up into our consciousness. It's an ion. It's going to play itself out. There's fuck all you can do about it. You're not going to run around and convince people otherwise. Elon Musk tried that. He is far richer and far more high status than any of us, and he couldn't even get it to get done. So there's a problem here. This is coming. I don't know what to do about it, but it's happening. Now there could be a huge downside. It could, like, imagine if we literally make the fucking Antichrist. Imagine how God would be sitting up there being like, Jesus.
Did you see that, the first appearance that Elon Musk had on Joe Rogan when he was talking about AI? Do you remember that when he was like, the way he said it? He's like, I tried to convince them to slow down the creation of AI. Nobody listened. It's just, it was scary as shit, man. And it's true because, like what you're saying, it's because human beings were imperfect and we're trying to create this God thing. And every attempt that we make, there's always these, like, did you hear this one story about how these Microsoft guys tried to get two AIs to interact, and then they started interacting in their own language so nobody else could understand them? And then they had to shut it down just in case, they didn't launch all the nukes all over the world or something.
What?
Yes.
That is so nuts.
Yeah, so it's how in God's name are human beings going to be able to create something like that doesn't destroy us all? I don't think you can. And I think, unfortunately, we're going to keep doing that, and then Elon Musk's nightmare is going to come true. But that's hopefully there's more optimistic people out there that can convince me otherwise.
Yeah, and these are extremely interesting things. So you have you have some serious problems here, because, as I said, this is so deep in psychology that we're going to be driven towards this. This is what the, like, if you're worried about, like, we're all worried about, like, the political stuff. It's like, forget about that, man. Like, some of our problems are the fact that people are blindly walking possibly into not only building Satan and then plugging Satan into our souls and uploading ourselves into Satan, but actually then giving him the controls to everything in the world and saying, I trust you, please do the best for me, and expecting him not to be like, delete. No, never mind. He won't click delete. He'll be like, let's put them in an eternal hell so I can suck their vital energy off them, like the Matrix. Like you said.
Oh God, have you ever played a game called Soma?
I haven't, I'm afraid, no.
Oh, okay. If you want to see something that's almost exactly like that, play Soma. It's utterly terrifying. It's basically human beings hook themselves up to machines and they can never die. It's basically hell in reality. Yeah. It's like all this, it's like you said, you look at these patterns and you see them happening before you, and you got to think maybe there's something to all of this. Now, as Jung says, as we've said many times before, I'm not saying it is, but I'm not saying it isn't either. You got to ask yourself, you got to look inwards and, see if any of this resonates with you on a deep and tangible level. And then you sort of got to follow that, just like you'd follow the Jungian conscience, the Jungian self,
And, like, that's actually a really good point. It's like, this stuff doesn't end. It's just like, you don't read Aion and think that, all right,
I know everything now. Yeah.
Like, literally look through video games. They're artistic outlets. They're ways the right brain would sneak its message into things.
Yeah.
Like we're trying to say, that the right brain is naturally just going to sort of project or leave these patterns lying around. And Jung studies them and actually deducts what we could call the intelligence of the high magician. Again, the fundamental premise for all this stuff making sense is to understand that there's a good neuroscience that tells us that the right brain is at least more intelligent than the left brain, or more in touch with reality, I should say, than the left brain. And so we have to give it credence. When we're scaling that and looking at stuff like literature, we're seeing these patterns. And so when the movie The Matrix comes up, like, the reason why it did so well is probably because it hit home so well, because probably part of us knows the shit like this is going on. When we play these games, like, there's part of us that knows that this stuff is going on. When you're going through a period of bad dreams, like, I work with people who have anxiety. I work with people using Jungian psychology and all that stuff. I literally try to help them overcome this stuff. And I sit down and we read one of their dreams, and it's fucking eerie. It's almost like if Hollywood made a movie to explain your problems to you instead of some self-help dude. Instead of getting it logically broken down to you or rationally broken it down to you, you got to see a film that represents your problems. That's sort of what Hollywood represents. And so you've got all these games and all this stuff. This is like the dreams of the culture. It's actually showing you what our minds are struggling with right now. Yeah. We're not writing films about, like, is Jesus, should we use Gothic script or should we be Protestant or Catholic? We don't care about that anymore. Right now we're being like, are we getting plugged into the fucking Antichrist or God himself? Which is happening? Tell me.
Yeah, you gotta pay attention to the art of your age, and a lot of the art that I have found in that seems to be discussing these really profound, difficult problems, oddly enough, are video games. And, what I sort of been trying to do with my channel is try to promote the idea that video games and their narratives can be academic pieces of art that should be discussed along with all the great works. But the problem is, just because video games are such a nascent medium, people aren't really willing to accept that yet. But as I just pointed out in regards to Metal Gear Solid 2 and Deus Ex, within these games, they might actually have something that we need to pay attention to as significant pieces of art and ways that we can move forward into the future.
This can be our social justice movement, man. It's to redeem the video games, man. Get these pretentious fucks to pay attention to us. Damn right.
Yeah.
I actually think you're correct, though. I think like video games is probably the most fertile place for stuff like this to start popping up, because like films have actually gotten political, and almost everything has. And so one of the last places where, well, actually it's happened in video games too. Actually, I'm sorry to say, but you know what I mean. Like these things where you're not looking for art is possibly where you'll find them. Like graffiti had that effect for a while.
Yeah.
People weren't looking for art there, and actually started to show up, and then obviously it's become shit again. But,
as the alchemists say, instinctively invenitur. You'll find what you need most where you least want to look.
Boom.
Yes,
100%.
So,
well, I was going to say, let's keep running with these possibilities, because I think there's other ways you can look at this.
Dude, you read my mind. So I wanted to ask, in regards to some of the patterns that Jung is pointing to, and these are some of the things that I really wanted to talk to you as sort of therapeutic for me, because a lot of these things are terrifying. As I said at the end of my Aion series, as to what the new Aion might have in store for us, I had an interpretation, and I'd like to know if you agree with this or if you have your own interpretation. Now that the Christian and anti-Christian energies are more or less established, and as you and I both know, these energies are symbolized by fish. You know, the Pisces constellation, they represent the Christian and anti-Christian fish, and those can be transposed onto the 2,000 years of the age of Pisces. If you haven't watched my Aion series, you guys would understand this, but just moving on. Now that these fish have been established, these energies, they now have to come together in the water. And what I said is that, you know, it's appropriate that the next Aion is labeled as the Aion of Aquarius, because that's labeled as a water bearer. So now these two energies need to figure out how to live together within the water. But also, I offered another interpretation, and maybe you can choose which of the two you like better, or like I said, if you have your own interpretation, is that in the new Aion, the people that the way it's going to be defined is that people are going to have to carry the alchemical water, you know, the aqua permanens, the blood of Christ, the truth, the veritas, forward into the new Aion, as people are, you know, trying to keep things together as things are falling apart, it seems, right now. And that will be, you know what I'm trying to say? Sorry, I feel like I'm
No, it's brilliant. Like this is okay. So there's a lot of actually stuff to cover here, because this is where it genuinely just gets so interesting. Is, as I said, once you grab this symbol of the living stone, you can start pontificating. If you get all this theory sort of straight in your mind and understand what Jung's doing with the whole tuning into the patterns with the right brain, and you start to project out into the future ideas, and you grab this living stone and you say to yourself, well, where would this necessarily be going? And as we said, one possibility is that we go down the route of, make Satan and all that stuff. Well, look, the living stone is just one symbol. This is what's so interesting about it. The Aquarius is another symbol. And then there's actually related symbols to that. Like each of these symbols, you can talk. There's so much to talk about them. Like Jesus Christ is not so. They didn't just talk about Jesus Christ for like 10 years and be like, well, we've exhausted that anyway. That was good crack. What's the next thing now? Like it took them 2,000 years, and we're still struggling to kind of get a grip of what went down there in Rome or in Judea all that time ago. And basically, it's the same with this. So we can make one set of projections on the stone. Like there's another one I want to talk about in regards to this before I get on to Aquarius. And then when I'll go into that, I'll talk about some other things we can get from it. But it does actually tie, because Aquarius is like the symbol of a man. It's the symbol of a person. You've heard of like the age of Aquarius, and they always talk about it being about technology and all. It's sort of like, it's implicitly suggested that it's the technological man. It's the sort of tech guy, if you will.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay, and that's what a lot of people put down. If you want to think about it, think about Ubermensch, transhuman, Robert Downey Jr., that type of thing. Like that's what people imply about it, right? And so, as we said, symbols of the self. We have the fish. Now we have the man. Now, what is actually, like? There's so much to this. What is the whole premise of the last 400 years since the Enlightenment? 500 years since the Enlightenment.
Well,
it's actually. The Renaissance was a humanist movement. What is that? It's man is the measure of all things. It's the us bringing us down to seeing ourselves as like the center point for all this actions. Okay, so we have on the one hand this living. Sorry, you're going to say something before I go on a tirade.
I forgot what it was, man. Go ahead.
Apologies, dude. Apologies.
Okay.
There's like a fucking train over here. Like, because I've been holding this in for months, and I've had no one to talk to about it. So I'm just like vented. Give me apologies for this.
It's all good, dude. You're making perfect sense to me.
I don't know, is that a good thing?
Or just two crazy people talking about all
Good,
this.
Yeah. That's probably what's going on. Yeah. And so you have this stone, and one direction is, make Satan. We make the machine. And it's like the way we see God. We see God as outside of ourselves. And we're like, all right, God is out there and he's going to swoop down and punish us. That's what the Christians believe, for being fools. We probably deserve it. And in the same sense we approach with the AI thing. It's the materialist paradigm. Okay. And we think that we're going to make AI Satan, techno Satan. We're going to build him. And it's going to be a thing we do. It's like building a church. It's like a separate thing. Mm-hmm. Okay, now this is interesting because one of Jung's and Nietzsche's critiques of the way that we understand God is that we make the mistake of objectifying it. What killed God was our idea that he's a man in the sky.
Yeah.
Whereas the ancient Christians would have saw him much more as like an intrinsic force inside you, but whatever. So this is one way we're looking at it, this materialistic way. We're going to build techno Satan. And it's going to be like this project in Silicon Valley, and everybody's going to gather around in a big circle, and then it's going to rise up and stand up and all its pride and glory.
I'm sorry, when you say techno Satan, the image that comes to mind is Mecha Hitler from Wolfenstein, and I'm just like, man, even if that would kill us all, I just want to see it because that would just be too cool, Sorry.
Now I see a real problem is that like Elon Musk was like, guys, we shouldn't do this, and everybody's like, yeah, but it'd be cool.
Yeah, exactly. It's just too cool to not happen. Even.
Fuck it, dude. Yeah. Well, look, I'm not sure if I disagree. Let me put it that way. But anyway, that's one way of seeing it. Another possibility is, as you brought up, what about the unity of man and machine? Now, this is where things get really interesting because, as we said, the other symbol that comes along with it. So this idea of the materialist techno Satan is actually tied to the error that we have with God. It's actually a bit of a mistake. So it's just one way of seeing this. It's one dimensional. But if we combine the two symbols together, we get man and machine. We get Robert Downey Jr. with the tech suit, the space suit. And this actually, like, if you think one is scary, this actually starts to get even scarier. Why? Well, I talked about weapons at the start. The reason why the Indo-Europeans could murder every single man in Spain is because they had chariots, and the locals, they had little sticks and stones. And I don't know if you ever tried to stand up against a chariot with just a normal sword or anything like that, but you don't stand a hope. You're going to get mowed down by these people. And so these Indo-Europeans, probably like maybe a family, an extended family of some sort, their genetics rule over all of Russia, all of Europe, most of North Africa, most of the Middle East, well, a lot of the Middle East, and all the way over even to North America. And these are the people, like the English and Irish, they're all the same people. These guys, these Indo-Europeans, they swamped everything. And like I said, Christ comes along and he swamps everything with these new institutions of the church and all this stuff. Now, this is pretty intense. So forgive me if I start going off the rails a bit. This is just a possibility, right?
Okay.
We're running with this thesis of liberty, fraternity, and equality. That basically means we're all in this together and we're all equal. And well, what would the Antichrist do? Only he would definitely lie to you and say, "Oh, everything's going to be all right. Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you." Nietzsche pops up and says, "Guys, all these values that we're talking about, complete bullshit. Like, we don't believe them at all." I'd be really, really wary of building a culture on these because it's almost like against natural law, which is inequality. But anyway, what happens now is that we're at the end, sort of at this point in history where it's like we're going to build these tech machines, and they talk to people about this and they sort of say, yeah, we'll all merge man and machine together. And I think if you think about it, I've studied human nature. I think humans are brilliant and gorgeous and all that, but I have a feeling that if some guy got the tech together to unify man and machine first, and that gave him this unfair advantage, like the Indo-Europeans had over everybody else. I wonder, like I trusting techno Satan is one problem. But the reason why techno Satan would kill us is because precisely our, shall we say, innate evil, if you will. And you wonder that if, all these tech guys that are doing so brilliant and all that, like, they say a group of them get together, they build these tech suits that gives them, artificial intelligence power where they can just, I don't know, make rockets out of stones or something like that, or live forever. And why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they formulate and I don't mean just class, but like literally like superior race or something like that? Why wouldn't they just ascend into a different category above the rest of humanity? With the same justification, think of it, the same justification as what the European Christian kings did. When they took, when Rome fell, all these German tribes ran around, took over the societies that were left, and said that God put us here, divine right of kings, and sat there for 2,000 fucking years, man. They didn't go anywhere, and most of them were related. And so why would this tech advantage not sort of lean in that direction? Now, that is quite a radical thought, I know, and I'm just saying it's a possibility that you could look at. And so that's one avenue you can go down. That's an extremely scary one, because imagine someone who has, technology doing all the work for them. Imagine what you could do if you had, you would Google and Facebook talking to people, making them fall in love with you, and then you shooting off to Mars. Like, even in a simple sense, like, don't even think of it as this evil thing, but imagine just if Jeff Bezos decided, I want to go to space. He's probably richer than most countries at this point. And he could just be like, right, guys, build a rocket. I'm out of here. Like, I'm going to do my own thing at this point.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, no, he's not going to do it with everyone. People are going to work for him, and they're going to be happy to be a part of, like, the Christian kings are going to be happy to be a part of his kingdom, but he's the one who's going to go and take off and all this stuff. So it's an interesting way of looking at this. Maybe that's one way it will go. And what I mean by that is that that's sort of the Aquarian man. This is this ascendant man in some sense. It's connected with this old way of seeing. Then there's other possibilities. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I was just about to say, when you said that, the man carrying the container of water as a sort of a marriage between man and machine, I never actually thought about that, and that actually can make a whole lot of sense. Because it sort of pretty much just confirms what I said before, using the Deus Ex example, where you have to combine yourself with technology in order to become a higher spiritual as well as rational being, and sort of become like a sort of messiah. I hate using that word because, for obvious reasons, but you get what I mean. Just sort of guide people in this currently confused world where we don't know what's going on and everything seems so chaotic, and lead them forward. And maybe that involves like leaving the Earth and going to Mars and stuff like that. So that makes a lot of sense. I really like that perspective.
Yeah, that could be a really, really interesting way of going. And I guess, like, the thing I'm trying to emphasize, I think the scary side of this one is that, like, and this is sort of the idea of carrying the water of Christ into the future. I do think that some people who make these transhuman spacesuits and all this, if you will, and become these super beings, leaders, if you will, some of them will be good. I imagine other ones will be bad. I just don't see how this could go smoothly. Like, these things just work this way, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, that's the thing I'd just be keeping in mind. I think that's what, like, let me put it this way, that would make for a very interesting movie premise or something.
Well, we've sort of already seen it with Terminator and Matrix and stuff like that, but hopefully, with those pieces of art sort of warning us about these unfortunate possibilities, we can sort of build up an effective counter movement, and maybe that will be the work of the water carriers in the new Aion.
And that's a really, really interesting direction to go down, and I'll actually get to that now in a second as well. So there is that. There was also tied into that is like a litany of important things to understand. Like, for example, with the transhuman thing, you look at the guy who makes Stripe, Irish dudes, and juicy chads, figured out 7 elegant lines of code and built one of the richest companies in the world. But they're very, very bad at talking. They don't really, like, their humanness doesn't even seem to be there in some sense. They're very inarticulate. They're very shy and nervous. You can tell they're socially awkward, very skinny. They don't really seem like they're in their bodies at all. They seem like they've sort of abstracted into the internet a little bit. It seems like they've. Sorry
to interrupt you, but what company are you talking about?
Stripe. It's a payment company.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah. But you could look at, like, Facebook, or I don't know if you ever bought Ethereum before. You could look at Vitalik Buterin, like he's like dangerously skinny, and you look at these guys and it looks like they're sort of evaporating into the abstract world. They're uploading themselves into the cloud. So this is another way you can start looking at this stuff. It's weird. It's like, what do you mean upload your consciousness in the cloud? But I look at these billionaires, some of the richest people in the world, as I said, these Aquarian men, and like they're sort of doing it already, you know, like they're building themselves more and more into this thing. When stuff like 3D and art or virtual reality and all that stuff comes, like, how far is this stuff going to go, man? If some of the things that have been happening in the last 10 years, if you told that to someone in the year 2000, they'd be like, what are you saying?
Yeah.
So these things are very, very interesting and weird. Like, what happens if we talk about build the AI and all that? What happens as if it's this sort of thing where it's like you said with the Matrix, we all by choice sort of plug ourselves in to the giant new way of seeing things. It's not necessarily like we build the machine outside of ourselves and it turns around and says, anybody named Max must be deleted. Like, it's not like that. What happens if we all sit there and we plug ourselves in? We're already doing this, and we just gradually completely plug ourselves in, and it's like we actually leave the real world in some sense. Like, it goes, the Matrix happens slowly. What happens is it starts off with watching your TV, and then, look, all right, so in the 1950s we all start watching TV. Only 100 years later, 2050, that's not very long. Would it be so unrealistic to say that there'll be a couple of people in this world who have decided to just get their bodies and put it in some type of pod that they can, and then to put like a virtual reality headset on them and have some type of medical thing where they make sure that their blood and all that is kicking, and then they just live in this virtual reality the whole time? Like, I don't think that's that far off. I don't think that's out of this world.
I just wonder, sorry to interrupt you, but I just wonder if, given the fact that a movie like The Matrix exists, that people would be, well, I struggle with whether people would be willing to do that, but considering, how connected we are nowadays and how stupid we see people act, just being willing to do that and not consider some of the moral and ethical consequences of being hooked up to a paradisal realm where you can't really evolve. Maybe that's
and so this is the extremely intense psychological first principle here, is that the reason why Mars was worshipped by the Romans is because Mars is what saved you from suffering. That's what the self is. The Messiah is he who saved you from suffering. And so we all suffer. To live in a body, to live in biology, to live in reality is to suffer. That's what almost all religions premise. And if you become a juicy Mars-like Roman warrior, you conquer people, you take what is yours, and you establish your villa, and you live happy. You overcome suffering. You possess things. You become better than other people. You make them your slave, and you live happy. And then with Christ, it's the same thing. You suffer because your psychology is actually wrong, and you get angry and all this stuff, and you actually need to find inner peace and all this. It's the same thing. You conquer suffering. Now, as unethical as this stuff might seem, as we said, Elon Musk knows it's unethical, but he talks to people, but they're driven by make the living stone, make the living stone. And even deeper underneath this is a very, very tragic thing. To live in our bodies is hard. A lot of these people, a lot of these brilliant tech guys and all that stuff, like, I look at them and they're in pain. First of all, they're just physically skinny, they're damaged and all this, and they're unhealthy. And you can tell that that's not a nice body to live in. And I don't mean that as a slander to them. It's just that, like, when you don't look healthy, it's actually a very honest signal about what's going on. But more so than that, they find it difficult to talk to people. So you tell that they're sort of struggling with social stuff and all that, and they feel a bit ashamed. And if you could turn around to someone like that and say, I know it's weird, but imagine if you could just escape that pain, and it could all be over, and you'd never have to deal with it again. And it'll be fine. You'll go into a better reality, a heaven,
Yeah.
Like, I am almost sure most people would choose that, because people are driven by emotion more than reason. And that's frightening, because, as we said, you're just going to get pushed towards that reality, that choice, because the incentives align, which is, I don't know, it's pretty intense, it's pretty intense.
I get the feeling people are going to try and sue us for like psychological corruption or corrupting the youth, sort of like how frickin' Socrates was persecuted by the ancient Greeks, because what you're saying here is just, it seems so likely. And I'm just thinking like a reality like the one established in Ready Player One, where everybody's just hooked up to this universe and the entire world around them is degrading. It does seem quite likely.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. All right, it's pretty intense. Hopefully, the machine, when it gets up and running, it doesn't turn around and be like, Steph and Max, they had a chat. Delete them quick first.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's that, and then there's another possibility, and I'm sure there's a litany of others. Like if you reach your eye on yourself, you will find symbols that I missed. These are just some of the ones that I saw.
Yeah, we'd love to hear what your thoughts are, guys, if you're watching this in the comment section below.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, because there's so much that he put in there. These are the ones that I could grab and make sense, you know? So this is why I can sort of present them with a reasonable amount of context. Mm-hmm. But he puts so much more in there, you know? So much more in there. And so I guess I have two big ones I want to talk about still.
Okay.
So the other one is an extension of the Aquarian idea. So the Aquarian myth and that zodiac thing is actually tied to, you say, the water bearer. Absolutely, that's true. And what that means is just that's a brilliant thing to go down. So we'll talk about that in a second. But there's also another. This is kind of creepy one, the myth of Gaiamate. Now this was and this is a tough one to get into. All right, so I'm sorry, dude. It's not like it's been easy so far, but it's going to get worse. All right, Gaiamate was the symbol of the Greek institution of pederasty. I don't know. Do you know what that is?
No, I don't. Please enlighten me.
Okay, well, that's where, you know, it's probably quite famous. I don't know if you've ever read the Symposium, where, you know, the Greek men of high status used to take a young lover, male.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I know about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically the grooming the teenage boys type thing. And it was considered an incredibly prestigious thing to be groomed by, you know, a high status man. The Symposium was about, you know, Socrates resisting the advances of a young boy, and it's quite interesting to read about them Greeks. Let's put it that way. And Camille Paglia, for example, like feminist philosopher, she's like she'd be pro quote unquote pedophilia, or she's trying to lower the age of consent because of the idea that the greatest moments in human history had this institution present. So it's really intense stuff. Now that actually turns out to be the symbol of Aquarius. That's tied to that thing. And I remember when I read that first, and I was like, I wonder, did Epstein kill himself and all that stuff? I was like, oh my God, no! What is happening? Oh no! This is the point where I was like, I don't think I want to see this stuff anymore. I think this is a bit too much. But then I kind of thought about it a bit more. Maybe this is just me rationalizing, but it's actually also tied to another myth. It's the institution. It's representative of that, but it's actually tied to a specific myth where you have a young boy called Gaiamate, and he climbs up the mountain, and this eagle is flying around the mountain. This eagle is the symbol of Zeus. Interestingly, also the symbol of Rome. But anyway, the symbol of Zeus. Okay. And Zeus comes down and takes the little boy's hand and lifts him up into heaven, basically. And so you can see where that turned into that institution, because it was a high status man lifting the young boy out of low status into, you know, prestige and all that. And okay, so that becomes an interesting thing, because you have Zeus. Well, who is Zeus? Zeus was fucking God, motherfucker. Zeus was the big, like the Romans, the Italians, the modern Italians and the Spanish, they say Deus. Like they don't say Yahweh. When Yahweh came down to Moses, I believe it was, and Moses was like, "What's your name?" And he goes, "I am that I am, Yahweh." All right, that's God. God says, "Yeah, call me Yahweh, call me my name, like say that I am." The Italians for 2,000 years, and the Spanish, they haven't done that. They've called him Zeus. You know, in the Irish, we say Dia, related as well. And so I don't know what's going on there, but anyway, this is who this dude is. And so at the top of the mountain, you have Zeus coming down, and at this point, you know, in the new Aion, you have Zeus coming down and grabbing Gaiamate, who is, of course, in some sense representative of the youthful new Aquarian man, or humanity as a whole, and he's grabbing him and lifting him up into, I don't know, heaven of some sort. And
who do you think that higher man is?
Oh, there's a good question. Like, is it the big G himself? I don't know. Like, will we go and build this big machine, like fucking little spastics that we are, and just run around, like, you know, build it, and Techno Satan comes, and then God kind of swoops down, finally says, "Jesus, you idiots! All right, here we go." Like, will Judgment Day actually happen? You know, these types of things. I don't know. I don't know what that means. I don't know what you're supposed to take with that. But there is this implicit idea of why here's a symbol that you have to contend with. The idea of not man reaching heaven. That's what we all think, man reaching heaven. No, man's going to get lifted up into heaven.
Yeah.
Okay, what? What are you talking about? We're going to get, like, God's going to lift us up into heaven? All right, man. And here's the last symbol that I found. And hopefully this will probably make for the wackiest listening anybody has listened to in a while.
Boy, here we go.
So basically, you have this whole thesis is premised on this idea of Jung understanding that you've got two forces in your mind which are made of psychology. And you've got this left brain and this right brain, as I understand them. Now, I'm putting words in Jung's mouth. Jung might have understood them a bit different.
Mm-hmm.
Ego and unconscious or deep unconscious. But Jung goes with the premise that, you've got this little eggshell ego, and it's useful for drinking out of cups and doing things, but it doesn't really see the big picture. It doesn't see how everything's connected. But then you've got this vivid right brain, this deep mind that's able to perceive things as they are, see all the patterns in the world and associate all those patterns and put together a big picture. And when you do that, you start to see that there's an incredible order to history, almost as if it's going somewhere. And this is a tough one. Jung says, Jung implies that this deep at the very bottom of this right brain, at this collective unconscious, is a personality.
Yeah.
That's ordering this stuff, right? And so if you want to approach this in a rational, scientific way, as we said, there's two personalities inside your head, and the right brain, the more quiet one, the one that's not really your ego, is intelligent, and it's really, really good at updating things at the right time. So maybe Jung was just seeing this. There's your out. Maybe Jung was just delusional in seeing this. But you can also quite easily see how you could make this leap in logic and say, okay, maybe that's ordering personality as well. If you really extend it out, if you look at all these collective right brains working together, and think about what that is, like 7 billion right brains working together, you sort of have something close to God. You have something massive there. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And so if you think about our problem, and this is an interesting problem, we're running towards this techno-Satan. We're running towards it because we want to be the living stone. I want to be the living stone. I want to be the living stone. And what that looks like, I've told you about this already. Our left brain is full of dopamine receptors that charges towards, it gets caught up with, like, drink out of the cup. Dopamine is addiction, basically. That's actually what the chemical is really, really good at doing. Motivation and addiction, all right? So think about what's happening. We've got this goal in our mind, simple category, living stone, AI, techno-Satan, whatever. And we've got all these left brains, 7 billion left brains collected together, jogging towards techno-Satan. And they're all caught up in this dopamine spiral, thinking they're going to reach it, and it's going to be heaven and it might be hell or something like that. And so what is the job of the right brain in the individual? What is the job of the collective unconscious, the superconscious, the big mind in the individual? What is its job? Its job is to try pay attention to these patterns, and sometimes pay attention to the left brain when it's being delusional, and update it. Like we talked about before, it's supposed to burst in when it gets a hint of the lion and snap the left brain out of it. Okay.
Yeah.
And so we've already made the sort of, flimsy premise. So it's up to you what you think about this, that all these right brains together are either God or tuned into God or something like that, or seeing God. And so we might run towards this left brain, a left brain goal of living stone, get pretty close to making it. And then we will have a snapback, an update moment from the right brain that will actually turn all this into, it will take our mistake and turn it into something good, hopefully. It might be some type of correcting. Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll be a disaster, and the right brain will update us in a very, very judgmental way or something like that. But regardless, we could start to see that this right brain might start to do its job. It probably already is. That's probably why it's showing us things like the Matrix. It's not doing that by accident. And
if you were to envision like a possibility of what this snapback might look like, where that correction is made, what do you think that would look like to you?
Good question. Good question.
It's hard to say.
So again, this is very psychological. Okay. So water is, for example, a symbol of emotions. The water bearer in the world of machines and all this, the water bearer is like carrying emotion of all things. Very, very useless thing in the world of matter and machines. But maybe it will be, what will happen is, like you're seeing this now. People are starting to snap back. Like it's this, what's happening right now is not trivial. Like people are starting to genuinely say no. Like I don't like what your plan is. I don't like this. You're hearing this. I don't like the way what you're progressing towards. And I don't just mean I don't just mean like, you know, right wingers or anything like that. I mean that like they're one group, but there's loads of, Elon Musk is sort of coming out and being like, guys, you know, I don't know about charging towards this stuff. And bit by bit, people are going to start to turn. You know, it's going to start to happen. People are going to start to turn. There's going to be bigger and bigger volumes of people who are turning against this stuff, who are feeling that there's something up, and it will be sort of emotional. Each little individual right brain will get triggered, and eventually it will start to form into a mass, and there'll be symbols that will rise up that will go against this. Like you're hearing some of them starting to form now. I'm not sure how accurate they are. As we said, these categories form. Sometimes they're not good enough, and so they die off. They'll last for a while, and then they'll die off, and they'll come back together. You hear some people saying like globalist, or you'll hear some people say stuff like arrogant tech elites. You're hearing that a lot, stuff like this. And these are people throwing patterns at these problems and all that stuff. And maybe it won't be what it turns out to be, but you can see what we're sort of saying is that there's an energy building up. There's an animosity, if you will, building up towards it. And it's scary. Like, is this going to be the end of history, or is this just going to be one blip along the road? Like,
I got something to respond to that. And I initially said to you that I was only able to go for 2 hours, but with everything that you just said there, I got a perfect way to bring it full circle. And I'm actually, you've been blowing my mind this entire time. I'm actually going to complete this by blowing your mind. So you're saying that we are seeing that snapback right now. Absolutely. One thing that we didn't discuss in full throughout this whole conversation is we did discuss astrology, but we didn't discuss one of the main focuses in Aion that Jung takes in regards to astrology, which is the conjunction of the planets, specifically Jupiter and Saturn. And what we have seen, as he outlines throughout Aion, is that whenever there's an alignment of the opposites of Jupiter and Saturn, something significant in history has happened. So let's go down the list. Let's start from the beginning. I'll cite a few, and then we'll see what's going. And this is going to scare the shit out of all of you, as it's scaring the shit out of me. But let's start from the beginning of the Christian Aion and work our way to the present. So first of all, Jung points out that at around 7 BC, I believe it is in the month of May, there were 3 conjunctions of Jupiter and Saturn in that year. And a lot in what Jung theorizes is that might actually be closer to the birth of what the actual birth of Christ is, not December 25th. That makes sense because, like in the tales of Christ's birth, when he's in the manger and the environment at the time, it doesn't really seem like winter. It seems closer to spring or summer. But anyways, moving on through history, there's another conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in, I believe, the year like around, I think it's like 529. And I think that's what he said. And it was in that year that the first monastery was established by Saint Benedict, which is a very important development in the history of Christianity. Just the merging of the higher with the lower. It's in the church, sort of establishing Christ's fulfillment in the material world. And moving on, at one point in our discussion, we were talking about Descartes. There was a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn, I believe, in around the early 1600s, I believe around 1628. And it's around that time that Descartes made his book, Discourse on the Method, which I believe is where he actually made his proclamation that I think, therefore I am, sort of beginning the whole progression throughout that period of the Aion where the anti-Christian sentiment is established. Well, check this out.
Oh, no.
The final conjunction that I want to point out to you guys of Jupiter and Saturn hasn't happened yet, but it's going to happen.
Don't say it.
In December of this year, December 21st, 2020. And apparently, the alignment of Jupiter and Saturn is going to be of such perfection that it's the last time we saw something this close in alignment was back in 1628.
Oh, no.
So what does that say? We're seeing a whole bunch of crap happen around us right now. The spreading of COVID-19, people, being mad at each other and not even knowing why, tearing down statues. What does this tell you? I'm not saying there's something here.
No.
Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. What do you think, Steafan?
Oh, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, we're so fucked, man.
This is
I hope.
this is why I wanted to do this conversation with you, because I don't know what to make of this.
Holy shit, yeah. See, it's all fun and theories and all that, but I hope to God it's not true because we are so screwed. Like the 21st of December, yeah, that would make a lot of sense though. That would be right after the election as well, interestingly, which is putting a lot of weight on the American voters. Holy crap. Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if things kick off because the tension point is incredible right now. I'd imagine it must feel right now like it felt in like 1913 or something like that. Like, you know, I could feel that it's gotten, I'm getting this feeling that people are like, there's no talking anymore. Yeah. Like it's done. Like where at this point, some people just want things to work this way and other people don't want that. Or they want it to work a different way, and there's no reconciliation. So it's conflict is the only way. And well, that's one thing. But what happens if the conflict turns out to be like raged in the ashes of like the rising techno Satan machine? What if Google unveils its like secret AI project or something like that, and it's like, oh my God, this is what's gone down. I'll tell you another nice, interesting fact. Oh, okay. And Jupiter is actually, of course, the good guy in this. Yeah. He's the good god. And what's interesting about Jupiter is that he's the Romanized version of the Greek god Zeus, which is also the god that was featured in Ganymede in the myth attached to Aquarius, yes. And Saturn, of course, I'm not sure if you've seen the Aion things, but Saturn is the god of time. Saturn is the god of the prison. Saturn is the god of, wait for it, Saturn is the god of Matrix. That's literally what he does.
God damn it.
You know what's... Yeah, no. Do you know what Saturn does? Saturn gets jealous of his children, that they will usurp his throne, that they will destroy his kingdom. And so he starts to consume them. He starts to eat them. And Zeus is, guess what happens? Hera, I think Saturn's wife, tricks Saturn from eating Zeus by feeding him stone. And then Zeus escapes, and then Saturn throws up, and then Zeus kills him, establishes the new order. I don't know what to make all that stuff. Is very, very...
I wanted to end this by me blowing your mind, not you blowing my mind.
Oh no, you did, dude. Believe me. The scariest thing that could have happened to me was fucking knowing that it's like 3-4 months away. So I'm like, oh man, I don't feel I've lived. I'm too young, man. Please, give us like 20 more years or something, then I'll be more ready for it. Yeah.
I spent all my life playing video games, damn it. And I can't go and see the world right now because of the disease.
Yeah, man.
But look,
there is one last thing I'd love to say, but I don't know, do you have the time?
Yeah, I have the time. Go ahead.
Okay. This has been brilliant, by the way. This is such an excellent conversation. Mm-hmm. Thank you for hosting this.
Thank you.
Just one nice little pattern that I noticed as well that I think puts weird context onto all this. This is kind of strange. Left brain, right brain. I shill it a lot because there's something to it. So, as I said, Jung saw these forces in the mind as relevant to study throughout history. And the left brain and the right brain is a very, very interesting thing because it sort of scientizes those forces, if you will. What do I mean by that? Well, the left brain clearly has a sort of behavior and personality, whereas the right brain has that as well. Now, what do they do? We've talked about this loads. The right brain is this sort of tuner, this master, this quiet magician that sees everything and notices patterns and thinks a big picture and updates the sort of king, the sort of left brain, right? And so the right brain sort of takes the personification as the disembodied God outside the picture. Now, this is all well and good. It's like, yes, Steph, you told me this already. But what actually happens is the left brain appears almost like certain characters in literature. You can kind of see it, you know, like Hamlet has some left brain traits in Shakespeare. Basically, he thinks too much. When I work with someone who has anxiety, like I go through I don't talk to them about Aion, that would make it worse, but I go through to them one of the, like, if you ever talk to someone who has anxiety, the consistent problem is the voice inside their head, the voice that's always criticizing them. And as we said, the voice is actually weirdly centralized on this left brain. And you can kind of subvert it a little bit by trying to get them to pull back and just observe what's going on. And what they start doing then is they start to observe that their left brain creates this web or this cloud or this maze around their head, or sometimes they even say this matrix around their head. They often say stuff like this. And this is not me telling them. I say, observe what's happening to your mind and tell me what you see. And this is what they start to describe. It's weird. Because what the left brain does is, as we said, it takes the real world of forms and everything moving together, and all the Heraclitus stuff, and it turns it into categories. It turns it into boxes. It creates a prison, a cage of categories, a cage of buttons, if you will. Matrix. It creates one of those for you. It lies in order to make something that you can use. It's not bad, but it's what it's doing. And so you see characters all throughout, like very in literature, that have these traits. And well, this becomes extremely interesting when you tie it with the Jungian idea of the Christ and the Antichrist, because you start to ask yourself, well, I wonder, does Satan have any of these traits? Satan is the deceiver, of course. He originally was called the adversary. Before he got his horns and his goat hoofs and all that crap, he was actually just a sort of blue fallen angel who lied, who offered power, who offered domination over the world. Think about the living stone here as well. He offers, I'll give you everything, right? And then Christ has this more attitude of like humility. And so that's all well and good. And that kind of comes up and it becomes quite interesting. But when things get really interesting is when you look around about 1600. Now, what happened in the 1600s? Well, of course, Descartes happened. This was the age of rationalism. And one of the most interesting pieces of literature to come out at that point was a book called Paradise Lost.
Yeah.
All right. And what happens in Paradise Lost is you have this very, very interesting thesis. God is essentially, and it doesn't explicitly say this, I'm sort of adding this color into it myself, but God is essentially like a choir master. And he has in front of him this choir. And this is the sort of thesis of how the world fell, the fall of the world, okay? So this choir he has in front of him, and he's getting them all to sing together in perfect harmony. It's like the right brain, it's tuned into the harmony of the world, and it's making something beautiful where we all work together, very Christ-like.
Yeah.
And of course, he has one character that is brilliant, the best soloist in the whole thing. And he can sing better than everybody. He's brilliant. But the thing is that he has to obey God. He has to listen to the choir master. He has to humble himself and be like, do 10 bars. Don't do 20, do 10 bars. Don't go crazy. Do it tastefully. Make it all harmonize.
Yeah.
And of course, this is very much how your left brain works. It's a brilliant, powerful tool. Brilliant, most powerful tool you have. It allows you to use the world. But it needs to obey the master, the right brain. So that's important. But what happens when the left brain, or shall we say this character in the choir, decides, fuck this dude telling me what to do. Fuck him. I can do it myself. What he does is he breaks away from the choir. He might even turn to some of the angels or some of the other choir boys and say, come with me and we'll make our own music, make our own choir, make our own kingdom. And so what does he do? He breaks away. He breaks away from reality. Exactly what a tyrannical left brain does. When it incorrectly categorizes things, it knuckles down and gets stubborn because it doesn't want to let go of what it knows. It wants to be king. It breaks away and it drops down and creates its own kingdom. And this is exactly what happens in Paradise Lost. You have Lucifer being the being of light, participating in the choir, who breaks away from God's kingdom and establishes literally what he calls pandemonium, where he stands around entrancing everybody around him with beautiful speech. Now, what does your left brain do? Only entrance you with beautiful speech in this ridiculous kingdom that it's after making up. Now, this is interesting that this book shows up in the age of rationalism and the rising age of the science and the age of the Enlightenment. It's funny that Lucifer becomes one of the cardinal symbols. Now, of course, if you look into stuff like the Illuminati and all that, these were all people who showed up around the same time. I'm not saying the Illuminati run everything, but you can understand why these groups show up.
Yeah.
And Luciferianism, the Freemasons were very much into that stuff as well. And
I know where you're going with this. Sorry,
well,
go ahead.
I'm not necessarily going with the secret society angle, but more this idea that what seemed to have happened in the culture at this point. This is actually an Ian McGilchrist take. Is that at this point in our psychological development, it seems like we all weirdly shifted out of the right brain into the left brain. And we got trapped in this way of thinking about rationalism, about our thoughts got simpler. Like I'm sure you've seen this where language in the 19th century was it almost looks like everybody's IQ was nearly 10 points higher because they were able to speak in so much more of a sophisticated way. But now people can only be like, fake news, deep state, far left,
Nazi,
far right. Yeah, that type of thing. It's like our language is chewed up into simplicity. This obviously coincided with the rise of the mass media, the printing press, and radio, and social media, and all that type of stuff.
Right.
And so it seems like we've weirdly, through our left brain, right? I'm not necessarily saying anything else, but you can extrapolate all you want. Once we as a culture sort of went into our left brains, and Nietzsche would say Christianity trained us for this. That's a whole other angle you can go into. And these symbols started to show up where it was literally showing us that we are Lucifer. Like, Paradise Lost is saying we are Lucifer trapped in our left brain. And our right brain is there like the artist screaming at us, wake the fuck up. What are you doing? Wake up, wake up. And you think about this. Think about the thesis that we're sort of presenting here, is that this Lucifer came as well alongside alchemy and the living stone. And so what is Lucifer saying to himself? I'm going to create God, and it's going to be me. I'm going to be God. I'm going to make it. I'm going to make it happen. And so he's caught up in this dopamine spiral, and he's a symbol of all of our left brains together caught up in this nonsense. And our right brains are screaming to us like the prodigal son, come back, harmonize, come back, slow down, and all that stuff. And so if you want a bit of hope, because a lot of this stuff is quite despairing.
I was about to say.
You can start to see that a lot of this stuff is tied to something quite psychological, in that maybe this is not a destiny, only that our psychology shows us that we are caught up in a psychological problem. We're caught up in a left brain problem where we're charging towards this living stone like Lucifer. And obviously psychological health, literally as Jung would define it, individuating as he calls it, would be about being able to balance these two sides of your brain, the unconscious and the ego, or the left brain and the right brain, if you want. And so it gives you this idea that as an individual, if you integrated your right brain, you would become better at using your left brain. And if you want to think about this in terms of technology, imagine that both of these things are actually just tools that you have. You want to use your tools the best you can. And we're off all around here trying to make tools to fix us, whereas we aren't able to use the two tools inside of our head, our left brain and our right brain. And if we could actually just maybe sit down and actually just try to use these two things, and basically what that would involve is listening to our right brain, what it's telling us. Maybe if one person could do that, and then that turns into 10, that turns into 100, and that turns into 1,000, then you would start to see what we could call a very integral counter punch to a lot of this stuff that's going on, an expose into the nonsense. Perhaps that is something you can look forward to. It's something you can control if you do it yourself. I talk about it a lot on my channel, so definitely check it out. But it's also something that you can have faith in, because as I'm saying, a lot of this, the reason why Lucifer appears in Paradise Lost is probably because a critical mass of people became left-brained rationalists. Imagine if you could get a critical mass of people to become integrated right-brain thinkers or unified thinkers or something like that. That offers you something to aim for that doesn't rely on technology, but actually relies on something you already have. You don't need to buy. You don't need to get. There's nothing you need to do. You just need to work at what you already got. You're already good enough. You're all juicy. There you go.
That's the perfect way to end it right there, dog. I love it.
Yeah, dude. Thank you very much for this. This is so damn good. I absolutely love talking about this stuff.
I've been holding my skull for the last 30 minutes trying to take in all this information. It was great. Yeah.
It's so good, sir. Thank you so much for doing the series. Thank you so much for giving me shout outs and all that stuff. And excellent. It was great to chat about this. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, no problem, dude. And just a reminder to I'm going to repeat what you just said before. Make sure you go over to Uberboyo's channel and subscribe, because he has a whole lot more of these hour-long discussions about things that will absolutely make you stay awake at night, but in the best possible way. I mean it. So I'll put a link to his channel below. Steafan, thank you so much. Hopefully we can do this again in the future, man.
Absolutely. It was an absolute pleasure, sir. And thank you, gentlemen. Over BOYO over now. I'm over there in Uberboyo. There's some music there as well. Give that a listen. I have a heart as well. Never mind all this talking. I have a bit of a heart. And check out uberboyo.com. I'm just building that right now, so there's still a few things to go up on that. But I'm going to see if I can do some membership site and that. There might be some private things there if you're interested in that. And that was all brilliant stuff. Thank you very much, sir.
Perfect. Stay safe, dude. And to everybody else that's watching this stream, you stay safe as well, but most importantly, stay yellow.